It was around November when I took a new job as an overnight custodian at a small hospital in Western Pennsylvania. It wasn't my first night job, but it was my first in a hospital, and I figured it'd be quiet, boring even. I'd been laid off from a warehouse, bills were piling up, and a buddy told me they always needed night help at St. Mary's. The pay wasn't great, but it kept me afloat. The building itself was old, most of it dating back to the 1950s, with newer wings tacked on over the decades. Some of the older parts weren't used anymore, but the admin kept them because they didn't have the funds to tear them down. Those wings were dark after hours, locked up, and we were told not to go in unless specifically asked. My first few shifts were uneventful. I swept the halls, emptied trash bins, restocked the bathrooms. The only other person on my shift was an older security guard named Dennis. He'd worked there for almost 20 years and always seemed half asleep during his rounds. He told me early on, "You hear weird stuff sometimes. Don't go chasing it. This building's got bad bones." I thought he was just being dramatic. One of those older guys who like to tell creepy stories to spook the new hires. But by my second week, I started to understand what he meant. The hospital was quietest between 2 and 4 a.m. That's when the whole building seemed to exhale. Even the HVAC system sounded slower. But during those hours, I'd noticed strange things. Trash cans moved from where I'd left them, doors open that I'd just closed, lights flickering in the unused West Wing. I told myself it was just my imagination, fatigue playing tricks. Then, one night, something happened that I still can't make sense of. It was a Wednesday around 3:15 a.m. I was cleaning the first floor waiting area when I heard a noise from the end of the hall, something like the squeak of a gurney wheel. I stopped, listening. The sound came again, faint but steady, rolling down the hallway toward me. The problem was, no one used gurneys on that floor overnight. The ER was on the other side of the building, and the elevators to the operating area were shut off after midnight. The sound got louder. I looked up, expecting to see a nurse or maybe Dennis doing his rounds. But the hall was empty. I turned off my vacuum so I could hear better, and the squeaking stopped instantly. That silence after that steady noise was worse than anything. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I walked toward the sound, passing the administrative offices. The hallway was dimly lit, just one fluorescent bulb flickering near the end. When I reached the corner, I froze. There was a hospital bed parked against the wall. One of the old models, metal rails, yellowing mattress, the kind they hadn't used in years. I hadn't seen it before, and I knew for a fact that maintenance had been clearing those out the week before. As I stepped closer, I noticed something else. Straps dangling from the sides. Restraints. There was a faint smell, too, something like rust and disinfectant mixed together. I don't know why I did it, but I leaned in to check the tag on the bed frame. It read, Ward D, 1963. Ward D had been sealed for decades, the old psych unit. That's when I heard breathing. Not mine, heavy, slow, right behind me. I turned around fast, but the hallway was empty. My flashlight beam shook across the walls. I could hear the air vents humming, but underneath that was another sound, low whispering, like someone mumbling through clenched teeth. I backed away, and my shoulder brushed the bed. It rolled slightly, creaking on its wheels. The whispering stopped. Then a loud bang came from somewhere down the hall, like a door slamming. I ran back toward the main corridor and nearly collided with Dennis. He looked startled to see me. "Jesus, kid, what's wrong?" I told him what I'd seen, the bed, the noise, the breathing. He went pale, shook his head, and muttered, "Not again." "Not again?" I asked. He sighed. Ward D used to be the isolation unit. Violent patients, shock treatments, that kind of thing. They closed it after a patient hung himself in one of the rooms. Ever since, stuff moves around that shouldn't. Beds, chairs. Hell, sometimes even the elevator to that floor turns on by itself. He tried to laugh it off, but I could see he wasn't joking. For the next few nights, I stayed clear of that area. I stuck close to the nurse's station or cleaned rooms near the main entrance. But strange things kept happening. I'd find wet footprints on dry floors, lights turning on after I'd shut them off, and one time the intercom system crackled to life and played static for nearly 10 minutes. No one was near the controls. Then, about 2 weeks later, I made the mistake of going near the basement. Dennis had called in sick, and I was the only staff member on site besides one nurse in the ICU. Around 2:40 a.m., the power flickered. When it came back, half the building's lights stayed out. I went downstairs to check the breaker room. The stairwell was pitch black, except for the emergency lights glowing faint red. The deeper I went, the colder it got. Halfway down, I thought I heard footsteps below me. I stopped, listening. Tap, tap, tap. They were slow, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on concrete. Hello? I called out. Maintenance? No answer. I reached the bottom and aimed my flashlight down the basement corridor. The light caught something, a door halfway open. The plaque on it was covered in grime, but I could still read it. Ward D, sublevel access. The air coming from inside was icy. I should have turned back, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, pushing the door open. My light swept across old equipment, rusted gurneys, empty shelves, and wheelchairs with flat tires. The floor was damp. Then I heard it again, the squeak of a gurney wheel, echoing faintly. Dennis? I said softly, though I knew he wasn't there. The sound came from the far end of the corridor. I walked toward it, the smell of mildew and something else, something like burned hair, getting stronger. At the end of the hall, there was an elevator. The doors were half open, and the old floor indicator lights above it were flickering between B and D. I leaned closer. The inside was pitch black, but I could hear something faintly, breathing again. Then, just as I started to back away, the elevator doors screeched shut. The sound was so loud it echoed all the way down the corridor. I bolted back upstairs. When I got to the stairwell, I swore I heard footsteps following me. Faster this time. I didn't look back. By the time I got back to the main level, the lights had returned to normal. I told myself I was just tired, imagining things. But when I checked the security monitors, the feed for the basement camera was frozen. The timestamp read 3:06 a.m. and showed the elevator doors slightly open, with what looked like a figure standing just inside. I zoomed in, but the image distorted. I went home that morning and told myself I wouldn't go back. But I needed the money. Over the next week, things escalated. The gurney from that hallway started showing up in different places again. One morning, I found it outside the janitor's closet. Another time, it was in the break room. No one else was there overnight, and Dennis swore he didn't move it. Then, one shift around Christmas, the hospital was nearly empty. The ICU nurse had called out, and I was alone for the first time. Around 3 a.m., the power flickered again and the intercom clicked on. But this time, instead of static, I heard a voice. Low, slow, whispering, Room 12. The sound repeated, Room 12, Room 12. I checked the directory. Room 12 was in the West Wing, the old psych section near Ward D. I didn't want to go, but something compelled me. When I reached the hallway, the light at the end was flickering. Room 12's door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me, like rot and antiseptic. Inside, the room was empty except for a rusted bed frame and cracked tiles. But the far wall had something carved into it. Over and over again, the same words, "Help us." My heart started racing. I turned to leave, and in the doorway stood someone, a man, tall and thin, in an old hospital gown. His head was shaved, his eyes completely black. His mouth opened, and the same voice from the intercom said again, Room 12. The lights went out. I screamed and ran, feeling something cold grab the back of my shirt as I bolted into the hall. I didn't stop running until I was outside in the freezing air, chest heaving, tears streaming down my face. I quit the next morning. Didn't even go back for my last paycheck. About a month later, I saw on the local news that part of St. Mary's had been condemned. Workers found a sublevel under the old Ward D, sealed off with concrete. Inside were patient files, old restraints, and the remains of at least 6 people. No one knew who they were. Sometimes I still dream about that hallway, the sound of that squeaky wheel, the whisper saying, Room 12. And every now and then, when I'm driving past old buildings late at night, I swear I hear that faint metallic squeak again, rolling just behind me. Story the end. The night I started at the hospital, I told myself I could handle anything. I'd worked in long-term care before, I'd seen death, I'd heard the cries that come in the small hours of the morning. But St. Delmar Hospital was different. It was old, really old. The kind of place where the walls seemed to breathe with the weight of everything they'd seen. I took the night shift in the emergency department because it paid the most. 12-hour shifts, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I told my girlfriend at the time that that I'd get used to the hours, that the constant flow of patients would keep me alert. I didn't tell her that from the moment I stepped inside that building, something in me recoiled. The halls always smelled faintly of antiseptic and old blood. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a static hum that never stopped. And beneath that hum, if you were quiet long enough, you could hear something else, a distant, rhythmic creaking like an old bed shifting somewhere it shouldn't be. The nurses had stories. Everyone did. They said that before the hospital had been renovated in the 1980s, the basement had been used for psychiatric patients. There were restraints on the walls down there, rooms with no windows. One of the night janitors swore he heard screaming when he worked near the boiler. He quit after a week. I didn't believe any of it. Until the fourth night. That shift started like any other. I took report from the day staff, restocked supplies, and settled into the nurses' station with a mug of burnt coffee. Around midnight, the ER quieted down. The monitors beeped softly and the halls were empty. Then the power flickered. It only lasted a second, but all the lights dimmed and the air conditioning stopped with a low groan. When it came back, one of the trauma room doors was open. I was sure I'd closed it. I went to check. The bed inside was empty, the sheets tucked tight, but the monitor beside it was on, flatlining. I reached to turn it off when I noticed the name written on the patient board. D. Henson. I froze. That was the name of a patient who had died 2 weeks ago. We'd coded him for 40 minutes before calling it. I'd been in the room when they pronounced him. The bed he died in was this one. I erased the name, turned off the monitor, and forced myself to laugh. Probably one of the nurses messing around, I muttered, except no one else was near that room. At 1:45 a.m., I took a call light from the far end of the corridor, room 3. That room had been empty since earlier in the week, waiting for cleaning. I stared at the light, blinking red, wondering if maybe someone had accidentally triggered it during housekeeping. Still, protocol was protocol. I walked down, clipboard in hand. The hallway lights flickered overhead as I got closer. The room was dark when I stepped inside. I flicked on the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulbs stayed dead. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing the bed pushed against the wall, the monitor unplugged, the curtain half drawn. The call light was still glowing faintly on the wall. I pressed it to reset it. The moment I did, the bed creaked. It wasn't loud, just that soft, unmistakable shift of weight, as if someone were sitting up. I aimed my flashlight toward the bed, my chest tightening. There was an impression in the sheet, deep, long, like someone had just been lying there and rolled away. Then I smelled it, antiseptic mixed with something sour, metallic. Blood. Hello, I called out, my voice shaking. The silence pressed back at me. The bed creaked again, and this time I saw the sheet move, just slightly, pulling tight, then slackening like invisible fingers brushing across it. I backed out of the room, slammed the door, and nearly dropped my flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the intercom button to call security. When the guard arrived, he checked the room, his expression unreadable. "There's no one here," he said flatly. He looked around once more, then nodded at the air vent in the corner. Probably just a draft. But I saw the way he avoided looking at the bed. After that, I couldn't focus. Every beep of a monitor made me flinch. Every creak of a gurney made my pulse jump. The rest of the staff joked that I was letting the night shift get to me. Maybe I was. The next night, it got worse. It was around 3 a.m. when I went to deliver paperwork to the basement records room. That level was hardly used anymore, just rows of old charts, dusty shelves, and one working light over the center aisle. The air was stale, damp. My shoes echoed sharply on the tile as I walked. Halfway through filing, I heard a soft sound, a shuffle, like someone dragging their feet just around the corner. I turned off my flashlight and listened. Nothing. Then, faintly, I heard breathing. Slow, labored, rasping. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. The light above me flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. I was swallowed in darkness. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept it across the aisle. The beam landed on something that made my stomach drop. A hospital gown, hanging from one of the racks, torn, stained dark at the collar. There shouldn't have been any clothing down here. As I stared, the fabric moved. Just a twitch, like someone's breath catching behind it. Then came a voice, hoarse and broken. "Help me." I dropped the files and ran. I didn't stop running until I was back on the main floor, gasping for breath. The nurse at the desk looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You okay?" she asked. I couldn't answer. I just nodded, went straight to the break room, and locked myself inside. When morning came, I told my supervisor I wanted off nights. She laughed, said there was a wait list a mile long for day shift. I had no choice but to go back. Over the next week, the pattern continued. Every night at roughly the same time, the same flicker of power, the same monitor flatline in Trauma 2, the same faint creaking in Room 3. One night, I decided to stay in the hall between them, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. At 1:42 a.m., the lights dimmed. I stared down the hall. The trauma room door began to open slowly on its own. The monitor inside beeped once, then flatlined. I forced myself to take a step forward, and that's when I saw him. A man standing just inside the doorway, pale, soaked in sweat, hospital gown clinging to his skin. His eyes were wide open, mouth moving soundlessly. For a second, I thought he was real, a patient who'd wandered. I rushed toward him, but when I reached the doorway, he was gone. The bed was empty, the monitor still flatlined. The faintest whisper drifted through the room. "You let me die." I staggered back. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep hold of the chart. I hadn't worked the code that night. I hadn't been the one who called it. But I'd been there, watching the man's chest rise and fall slower and slower. I remembered his eyes, cloudy and afraid, staring right at me as the doctor announced the time of death, the same eyes I'd just seen. After that, I started avoiding that end of the ward. I'd trade tasks, take extra vitals, anything to stay away, but no matter where I went, the feeling followed, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. On my final shift, I came in exhausted. I'd been having nightmares, the monitor beeping, the whisper, the dragging sound. I was pale, jumpy, and every shadow made me tense. Around 2:30 a.m., I went to get coffee from the break room. When I came back, my station phone was off the hook, swinging slightly. I lifted it and pressed it to my ear. Static. Then, beneath it, a faint voice. "Come downstairs." I hung up immediately, but the call light on room 3 flashed to life. I don't know what possessed me, but I went. My stomach was in knots, my legs shaking. The hallway lights flickered as I approached. The door was wide open. The bed was occupied. Someone was lying there, covered with a white sheet. I stood frozen. The monitor beside the bed beeped once, twice, then flatlined. I reached for the sheet with trembling hands and pulled it back. There was nothing underneath, just an indentation on the mattress, shaped perfectly like a body. The whisper came again, so close it felt like it was inside my ear. "Now you see me." Every light in the corridor went out at once. The air turned ice cold. I could hear the slow creak of the bed, the faint drag of feet across the tile coming toward me. I ran, screaming down the hall, through the double doors, out into the freezing night air. I never went back. I quit the next day. St. Delmar closed that wing of the hospital a few months later. They said it was due to structural concerns. But I heard from a friend who still worked there that the monitors in Trauma 2 sometimes beep on their own, that the call light in room 3 flashes at 1:45 every morning. And sometimes, when the night is especially quiet, the nurses swear they hear the faint sound of a bed creaking in the dark. Story the end. It was a Thursday night in late February when I started my first solo shift at the 24-hour gas station on Route 47. I was 23, broke, and desperate for work after getting laid off from a factory job. The manager, Dale, told me he needed someone who wasn't scared of working alone overnight. "It's quiet out here," he'd said, "mostly truckers, some locals, and the occasional weirdo." I laughed when he said that, but his tone wasn't joking. The station sat just outside a small Illinois town, surrounded by flat farmland and a line of trees that ran along the back property. Behind those trees was nothing but open field and a stretch of two-lane road that led into darkness. The lights from the pumps glowed harsh white against the black sky, and the hum of the refrigeration units was the only constant sound. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and Dale had shown me the basics during training: run the register, restock, clean the coffee machines, and stay inside after midnight. "Don't go out once it's dark," he'd said, glancing toward the woods behind the station. "Even if you think you hear something, it's probably just an animal." That first night alone was uneventful. A few truckers came through, some teenagers buying snacks, and one older guy who asked if I'd seen a black dog run by. I told him no, and he nodded slowly, staring out toward the tree line before leaving without another word. Around 2 a.m., I turned the lights in the store to half brightness and started mopping the floor. The emptiness of the place got to me sometimes, the way the fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, the soft chime of the motion sensor at the door that never seemed to ring after midnight. I'd leave the radio on low, just to fill the silence. The second night was different. Around 3:30 a.m., I went to take the trash out. Dale had told me to do it before midnight, but I'd forgotten. The dumpster sat about 30 yards from the back door, right near the edge of the tree line. I grabbed the bags, kicked the door open, and stepped into the cold. The air was still, too still. No crickets, no wind, no sound at all, except for my boots crunching on the gravel. I threw the bags into the dumpster and turned to head back when I heard it. Movement in the woods. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Crunch, pause. Crunch, pause. Like someone walking, matching my pace. I froze. The light from the building only reached so far, and beyond that, everything was black. My breath came out in small white clouds as I scanned the dark. The crunching stopped. I stood there another few seconds, then turned and walked quickly back inside, locking the door behind me. When I looked through the window, I could have sworn I saw something, a shape, maybe a person, standing just beyond the reach of the light. But the longer I stared, the more I thought my eyes were just adjusting to the dark. Eventually, I convinced myself it was a deer. Still, I didn't take out the trash again for the rest of the week. By the next Monday, I'd gotten used to the rhythm of the night shift. Around 1 a.m., I'd start making coffee for the morning crowd. That night, a man came in around 2:15. He looked like he'd been driving for a long time. Mid-40s, pale, tired eyes. He bought a pack of cigarettes and a cup of coffee. When I handed him his change, he said, "You hear that thing out there?" "What thing?" I asked. He took a sip of his coffee and looked out the window toward the trees. "Been driving this route 15 years. Some nights around here, I hear something walking along the side of the road. Thought it was a deer the first few times, excited, but deer don't follow you. They don't stop when you stop." I laughed awkwardly, but he didn't smile. "It's out there tonight," he said softly. "Stay inside." Then he walked out and drove off, his taillights fading into the dark. The rest of the shift was quiet until 4 a.m. when I started hearing it again, the crunching sound. Not right outside, but close enough that I could hear it over the hum of the coolers. I turned off the radio and listened. Crunch, crunch. Then a pause. I moved toward the back of the store and peered out the small window in the stockroom. The security light out back flickered once, twice, and went out completely. I backed away from the window, heart pounding. I wanted to call Dale, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I went to the register and tried to distract myself by counting change, but then came the sound of tapping. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the glass door. I looked up, expecting maybe a customer who'd arrived quietly, but the parking lot was empty. No cars, no trucks, nothing. I stepped closer, peering out. There were fingerprints on the glass, smudged, long, like someone had dragged their hand across it. They hadn't been there earlier. I backed away slowly and grabbed the phone to call Dale. No signal. I hung up, tried the landline behind the counter. Dead. That phone had never been dead before. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door. Then, faintly, from somewhere near the back, came the sound of the dumpster lid creaking open. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone was prying it open inch by inch. Then, silence. I counted to 10, then 20. Still nothing. I told myself it was the wind. I went into the office and checked the security cameras. The feed for the back of the store was fuzzy, static-filled, but I could make out something, movement near the dumpster. A shape, tall and thin, hunched slightly. Its head turned toward the camera for a split second, and I felt my stomach drop. It looked like a man, but the proportions were off. Too long in the arms, too narrow in the body. The footage glitched, cutting in and out, and when it came back, the figure was gone. I fast-forwarded through the recording, but there was nothing else, just the still image of the dumpster and the trees behind it. When the morning crew came in, I told Dale the security camera was acting up and that I'd heard noises outside. He nodded, unconcerned. You'll hear all kinds of stuff out here, he said. Coyotes, drunks, kids messing around. Don't let it get to you. I wanted to tell him about the man who'd come in, what he'd said about something following him, but I didn't. The next few nights passed quietly, but the tension never left me. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow deeper. Around 3 a.m. one night, I was stocking shelves when I heard the front door chime. I looked up and froze. The door was closed. No one had come in, but the chime had gone off. I checked the sensor. It was working fine. I turned to look outside and nearly screamed. Pressed against the glass, halfway down the door were handprints, muddy, smeared, and long. They hadn't been there a minute ago. I wiped one with a paper towel, and it left behind a dark residue that smelled faintly metallic. I locked the door again, double-checked the windows, and went into the office to watch the cameras. This time, everything worked fine. But around 3:40, something moved past the rear camera again. Just a blur, but fast, too fast for a person. I rewound and replayed it 3 times, and on the 4th, I caught a glimpse of something pale. Skin, maybe. An arm. The next morning, Dale was waiting for me when my shift ended. He looked tired. You didn't tell me you were checking the cameras at night, he said. I told him I was just making sure everything was secure. Good, he said. But don't bother with the back one anymore. That line's been weird for months. We've had techs come out 3 times, and they can't fix it. I'll just replace it eventually. I wanted to ask him what he meant by weird, but he changed the subject. Before I left, he told me to make sure I didn't take the trash out alone anymore. We had a guy a few years back, he said, who used to work that same shift. Said he saw someone in the woods one night. Then one morning, he didn't show up for work. Never came back for his last paycheck either. He said it casually, like he didn't fully believe it himself, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. 2 nights later, I found something strange when I arrived. On the back door, near the handle, were 3 scratches. Deep ones, like made by metal or claws. I showed Dale, but he just shrugged. Probably a raccoon, he said. They get into everything. But raccoons don't drag their fingers down metal like that. That night was the worst. It started quiet as usual. A few customers early on, then silence. Around 3:15, I was making coffee when I heard the door chime again. This time, it didn't stop. It kept chiming, ding, 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 as if someone were walking in and out rapidly. I ran to the counter, but the door wasn't opening. It was locked tight. Yet the chime kept going. I unplugged the sensor, and it stopped instantly. My heart was pounding as I stood there, staring at the door. That's when the power went out. Everything went black. The humming of the cooler stopped, the lights died, even the faint buzz of the sign outside disappeared. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it toward the aisles. The silence was suffocating. Then I heard the tapping again. Not on the glass this time, on the side wall. Slow, steady, deliberate. I turned off my light and listened. Tap, tap, tap. Then a dragging sound, like something sliding along the wall toward the back of the store. I moved slowly toward the office, every step echoing in the still air. The tapping followed, growing louder, closer. I shut the office door and locked it. The security monitor flickered faintly, the backup power still running. The screen showed static, but I could make out a vague movement on the rear camera, a shape near the dumpster again. But this time, it wasn't just standing there. It was crouched, and it was facing the door. The feed glitched again, and for a split second, I saw it clearly. It was pale, almost colorless, like it had no skin. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. It moved in short jerks, as if every motion was wrong somehow. Then the screen went dark completely. I could hear it now. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving along the back wall. Something brushed against the side door. Then silence. I waited. Minutes passed. Then came a single knock on the office door. Not loud, not threatening, just soft. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knock came again. Then slowly, the handle turned. It didn't open, thank God. I backed away, gripping the phone, ready to call 911, but the signal was still gone. I crouched behind the desk and waited. The sound stopped. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it whisper my name. Not loud, not distant, just clear enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. I stayed there until dawn. The power came back on around 5:30. When the morning crew arrived, I left without saying a word. I quit that day. Dale didn't even ask why. He just nodded, like he already knew. I drove past that station once, months later. It was boarded up, closed for renovation, or maybe permanently shut down. The lights were gone, the pumps removed. But as I drove by, I saw something near the back, just for a second. A figure, tall and thin, standing by the trees, watching the road. I haven't taken Route 47 at night since. Story the end. It was early December when I started the night shift at the nursing home. I had worked in healthcare for years, but this was my first overnight job. The pay was better, and I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The place was called Maplewood Care Center, a squat two-story building on the edge of town. Most of the residents were elderly and quiet, and the building was always dimly lit to keep a calm environment, as management liked to say. I worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the hours when most of the world was asleep. The first week went fine. I'd do rounds, check vitals, fill out reports, and make sure the residents were comfortable. Sometimes I'd sit at the nurse's station, drinking coffee and listening to the hum of the vending machine. But around my second week, I started noticing small things that didn't make sense, like how the hallway lights on the west wing would flicker around 2 a.m. every night, even though maintenance had fixed it, or how sometimes I'd find room doors open when I was certain I'd closed them before. Little things that I brushed off as fatigue or coincidence. Until the night of December 17th. I came in around 10:45, said hi to the evening nurse, and went over the notes. It was cold out, the kind of cold that bites into your fingers even through gloves. I remember rubbing my hands together and noticing that the air inside the facility felt unusually chilly too. The evening nurse joked that the heater must be dying again. I laughed, but my breath came out in a faint mist. That wasn't normal. My first round was at midnight. Most of the residents were asleep. I passed by room 103 where Mrs. Collins stayed. She was a quiet woman, 82 years old, who never spoke much. But that night, as I passed her door, I heard whispering. It was faint, but clear, like two voices murmuring back and forth. I knocked softly and stepped in. The room was dark except for the red glow of the emergency exit light from the hall. Mrs. Collins was asleep, her mouth slightly open, breathing steadily. But the whispering didn't stop. It came from the far corner of the room. I turned on the lamp beside the bed, and it stopped instantly. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The window was closed, the vent was quiet, and there was nowhere anyone could be hiding. I turned off the light, muttered something about needing more sleep, and left. At 1:45 a.m., I was writing in the logbook when the call light from room 110 came on. That was Mr. Davis's room, an old man with dementia who hadn't been able to get out of bed in months. I got up and made my way down the hall. The light above his door blinked faintly. When I opened the door, the room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. I froze, staring at it. Mr. Davis had passed away 2 nights earlier. The room was supposed to be vacant. I stepped inside slowly, checking around. The temperature dropped suddenly. It felt like stepping into a freezer. My breath came out in visible clouds. I could feel something in the room with me, though I couldn't see it. Then the call light above the bed started flickering faster. I backed up, reaching for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, but it was stuck. The flickering light turned solid red. Then I heard the sound of someone breathing right behind me. I turned around slowly and I saw a shape in the dark. It was faint, like smoke taking form. A man, gaunt and tall, with hollow eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, yanked the door open, and ran into the hall. The second I crossed the threshold, the air warmed again. The call light shut off. When I turned around, the room looked normal, empty, quiet, harmless. I reported it to the charge nurse the next day. She didn't even blink, just said, "Oh yeah, sometimes the system glitches when a room's unoccupied." But that wasn't a glitch. The next few nights were worse. I'd hear the sound of doors closing by themselves. Wheelchairs would roll a few feet on their own, and sometimes I'd catch movement at the end of a hallway, just enough to see someone turn a corner. But no one would be there when I checked. On December 23rd, I was doing vitals around 3 a.m. The halls were silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. I was walking past room 107 when I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was the sound of crying. It was soft, like a child sobbing. It didn't make sense. There were no children in this building. I stopped in front of the door, my hand shaking as I knocked. "Hello?" I called out. The crying stopped. I opened the door slowly. The room was dark, and the bed was empty. The monitor beside it was off, unplugged. As I stepped closer, I saw something move under the bed. Just a small shift, like someone was crawling there. I crouched down, shining my flashlight. There was nothing. But the crying started again, this time behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The door was still open. I ran out, my pulse racing, and nearly collided with the maintenance man, Carl. He grabbed my shoulder, looking confused. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed shakily. "Maybe I have." He stared at me for a moment before saying, "Don't joke about that here. Not in this building." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "This place, Maplewood, used to be something else before it was a care center. It was a psychiatric hospital, closed down after a fire in the 70s. A lot of people didn't make it out. Every winter, around the same time, weird stuff starts happening again." I didn't want to believe him, but something about the way he said it felt too certain to be a story. That morning, when I was clocking out, I noticed something strange in the lobby. There was a small framed picture on the wall I'd never seen before. It showed the original hospital staff from decades ago, all standing in front of the building. My stomach dropped when I saw the man in the back row, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes, the same man I saw in room 110. Christmas Eve was my last shift there. The manager had given everyone else the night off, so it was just me and one nurse on the floor. Around midnight, the power flickered. It wasn't unusual, it happened every so often in storms, but there was no storm that night. At 12:30, the generator kicked on, casting the hallways in a dull orange glow. I went to check the west wing, where the residents slept. The air was heavy, thick, and cold again. I started my round. As I passed each door, I could feel eyes on me. It wasn't imagination. I could feel the weight of a stare from every room. Some doors rattled as if someone inside was shaking the handles. I tried to move faster. When I reached room 103, Mrs. Collins's room, I stopped. Her door was slightly open, though I knew I'd closed it earlier. I pushed it open slowly. She was sitting upright in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the wall. "Mrs. Collins?" I whispered. She didn't respond. Her breathing was slow, but her mouth moved slightly, like she was whispering something. I leaned closer, and I heard it. "They're walking again." "Who's walking?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned her head toward me, her expression blank, and said, "The ones from the fire." Before I could ask more, the lights went out. Pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not just one pair, dozens. Some slow, some dragging, some heavy. They moved past the door, then stopped right outside it. I froze, holding my breath. The doorknob began to turn slowly, creaking in the dark. My flashlight flickered, then died. I backed away until I hit the dresser. The door opened. For a moment I saw shapes. Dark, half-formed silhouettes moving toward me. Some crawling, some standing crooked, their heads tilted unnaturally. The smell of smoke filled the air, thick and choking. I covered my mouth and stumbled toward the other door that led to the nurse's corridor. When I turned the handle, it was locked. The whispers started again, dozens of them, overlapping, frantic. Then I felt a cold hand grab my wrist. I screamed and pulled away, but the hand tightened, icy fingers digging into my skin. I swung wildly and fell to the ground. When I looked up, the shapes were gone. The room was empty again. The lights flickered back on. Mrs. Collins was lying down now, her eyes closed, as if nothing happened. I ran straight to the nurse's station, told the other nurse what I saw. She stared at me like I'd lost it, then told me to sit down and take a break. But when I rolled up my sleeve, there were fingerprints on my wrist. Dark, red, and unmistakably human. That was the last time I ever worked at Maplewood. I quit the next morning. A few weeks later, I heard from Carl, the maintenance man. He told me Mrs. Collins passed away in her sleep 2 nights after that. When they were cleaning out her room, they found old, burned photographs in her nightstand. Pictures of the original hospital staff. One photo showed the same man again, gaunt, hollow-eyed, standing beside a woman who looked just like Mrs. Collins, decades younger. Carl said, "She must have been one of them. Maybe she never really left." I still wake up sometimes around 3 a.m. thinking I hear crying down the hallway or whispering in the dark. I've worked other jobs since then, but I'll never do another night shift. Not after that, because I learned that some buildings don't forget their past, and some nights neither do the dead. Story the end. It was late October in northern Indiana when I started my new job at the packaging warehouse off Route 20. The place ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I was on the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I took it because the pay was decent, and I needed to catch up on rent after my last job cut hours. I told myself it would be temporary, just a few months. The warehouse sat at the edge of an industrial lot surrounded by cornfields, miles from town. At night, the nearest streetlight was half a mile down the road. You could step outside for a smoke and hear nothing but the wind moving through the dry stalks and the distant hum of the machines inside. The air always smelled faintly of cardboard, oil, and dust. I remember my first night vividly because of how quiet it was. There were maybe 6 of us on shift. Me, an older guy named Frank who'd worked there 15 years, 2 younger temps, a forklift driver named Luis, and our night supervisor, Kevin. Everyone kept to themselves, the kind of job where people just clock in, do their hours, and disappear. Kevin showed me the layout, the receiving bay, the loading dock, the pallet aisles, and the back storage room where the older inventory went before disposal. That back room was colder than the rest of the building, even though it was fully indoors. Kevin joked that the insulation back there never worked right since that accident. When I asked what accident, he just said, "You'll hear the story eventually." By 1 a.m., I'd gotten used to the rhythm, the constant conveyor hum, the beep of the forklifts, the clatter of boxes. Then, as the hours dragged on, things began to slow. The others went on break, and I was alone in my section stacking pallets. That's when I heard the first sound. It was faint at first, a soft tapping, like someone rapping their knuckles on metal. It came from the direction of the storage room. I paused, listening. The tapping came again, a slow, deliberate rhythm. 3 taps, a pause, then 2. I set my box cutter down and walked toward the sound. The lights in the warehouse flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. The further back I went, the colder it got. When I reached the storage room, the noise stopped. The room was pitch black. The motion sensor light didn't come on, which was weird because they always did. I stepped inside and waved my hand to trigger it, but nothing happened. The only light came from the faint glow of the hallway behind me. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid. No answer. Then I heard it again. The same tapping, only now it was coming from deeper in the room. "Frank?" I asked, half expecting him to jump out and mess with me. But there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. I pulled out my phone for light. The weak LED beam fell across stacks of dusty boxes, some labeled with faded shipping codes. Everything looked still, but when I turned toward the far corner, I saw movement. Something shifted between 2 pallets, just a quick flicker of motion. I froze. It looked like a person crouching low. "Hey!" I said sharply, stepping closer. My voice echoed off the walls. The movement stopped. Then came the scraping sound, soft, like fabric brushing against concrete, followed by a whisper. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of someone murmuring. My stomach dropped. I backed out of the room fast, slammed the door shut, and went straight to find Kevin. He was in the office, half asleep over paperwork. I told him what I'd seen. He didn't laugh or roll his eyes, just rubbed his face like he'd heard it all before. "You said you went into the back storage?" he asked. "Yeah, I thought maybe someone was in there." He exhaled heavily. "That room's supposed to stay locked. There's nothing stored back there anymore." "I didn't need a key," I said. "It was open." He frowned, stood, and grabbed his flashlight. We went back together. When we opened the door, the light came on instantly this time, flickering weakly. The room looked empty. Kevin walked in, scanning with his flashlight. "You didn't touch anything?" "No, just looked around." He checked the far corner where I thought I saw movement. There was nothing there, no footprints in the dust, no open boxes. He turned back toward me. "If anyone was in here, they're gone now." He closed the door, locked it, and looked at me. "If you hear anything else, ignore it. That room, it's got bad wiring, drafts, and the acoustics are weird. Sounds bounce. People think they hear things all the time." He tried to sound casual, but his eyes told a different story. The rest of the night went quietly, but I couldn't stop thinking about that whisper. The next few nights, nothing happened. I started to convince myself I'd imagined it. But on my fourth shift, just after 2 a.m., Frank told me something that froze me solid. "You heard about the kid, right?" he asked as we were stacking pallets. "What kid?" He lowered his voice. "About 5 years ago. Night shift guy, not much older than you. He was working back near the storage room when a stack of pallets fell on him. Crushed him. They said it was an accident. But," he trailed off, "some folks think it wasn't." "What do you mean?" "They said he was running from something. The security cameras caught him sprinting across the aisle, looking behind him. Then the footage just cut out. When they found him, he was under 3 tons of cardboard." "Jesus." Frank nodded grimly. "Since then, that room's been weird. Motion lights flicker. Things move. Once, I swear I heard someone crying in there." I laughed uneasily. "You're screwing with me." He didn't smile. "No, kid, you'll see." I didn't want to see, but I didn't have much of a choice. Around 3 a.m., I went to refill my coffee thermos. When I came back, I noticed something off. One of the boxes near my workstation was open. Not cut open, just sitting there, lid flipped back. I hadn't touched it. Inside was a single glove. Not a work glove, but a small, thin white one, like a kid's glove. There were smudges on it, dark, reddish-brown. I dropped the lid shut and looked around, but no one was nearby. I went to find Frank, but when I got to his section, he wasn't there. That's when the power went out. Everything went dark, and the hum of the machines stopped dead. The silence was absolute. I could hear the wind outside whistling faintly through the walls. Then came the tapping again. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Somewhere behind me. I turned on my phone light and slowly scanned the aisle. The beam caught the edge of a pallet, then the floor. And there, faintly, were footprints. Bare ones. They led away from my station toward the storage room. My heart was hammering. Every rational part of me said to stay put, but something pulled me forward. I followed the prints, one step at a time, my breath visible in the cold air. When I reached the storage door, I noticed it was open again. Even though Kevin had locked it 2 nights earlier, the light inside was off. The tapping stopped. I swallowed hard and said, "Who's in there?" No answer. "Frank? Luis?" Nothing. Then I heard it, not tapping this time, but a low sob, a child's sob. I took 1 step inside. The motion light flickered to life, and the air hit me, cold, sharp, metallic, like wet iron. The sound of crying grew louder, coming from somewhere near the back. I rounded the corner and froze. There was a small figure sitting on the floor, facing the wall. A child, or at least that's what it looked like. Shoulders shaking, head down, wearing that same thin white glove on one hand. "Hey," I said quietly. "You okay? How'd you get in here?" The sobbing stopped. The figure turned its head toward me, slow and deliberate. The face wasn't right. It wasn't even a face, more like a blur of pale skin and shadow, the features half-formed like wet clay melting. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and the sound that came out wasn't crying anymore. It was a shrill, distorted wail that echoed through the room. I stumbled back, tripping over a box, and the light flickered again. When it came back on, the figure was gone. I bolted. When I reached the main floor, the lights came back on. The machines hummed to life again, as if nothing had happened. Frank was standing near the break area, pale as chalk. "Did you see that?" I gasped. He shook his head slowly. "No, but I heard it. That scream." We both quit the next day. A few weeks later, I got a call from another worker I'd befriended, Luis. He said the company shut down the night shift. Something about safety violations, he said, though his voice told me he didn't buy it either. He also said they found something during the inspection. In the back storage room, beneath one of the pallets, there was a crack in the concrete floor, and when they lifted it, they found small bones, child-sized bones. They never found out where they came from or how long they'd been there. Sometimes I still dream about that warehouse, the smell of oil and cardboard, the hum of the lights. I dream I'm back there, and the machines stop, and from the dark corner of that storage room I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. Then the sound of a child crying just before the lights go out. Story, the end. It was late November when I started working the night shift at a small 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of a quiet Ohio town. The kind of town where nothing much happens, fields stretching for miles, a diner that closed at 9 p.m. sharp, and a gas station that mostly stayed open for truckers or drunks trying to sober up. I was 24, broke, and desperate for a steady paycheck, so I didn't ask questions when the manager, Tom, hired me on the spot. He told me the night shifts were slow, easy money, just keep the place clean and the register balanced. The gas station sat at the edge of Route 18, surrounded by empty farmland. Across the street was a small patch of woods, thick and dark even during the day. The locals had stories about those woods, kids disappearing, strange lights, weird noises at night, but I never believed any of that. I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and at first, it was exactly as Tom said, quiet, boring, and a little lonely. For the first couple of weeks, it was mostly truckers coming in for coffee and cigarettes, or locals stopping by for gas. Every night around 3 a.m., things would get completely dead. Not a single car, not even the faint sound of an engine on the highway. Just silence, thick and unnatural. I used to pass the time by restocking shelves or sweeping the floors, but even the hum of the refrigerators couldn't drown out how still it got. One night, about 3 weeks in, I noticed something odd on the security cameras. We had 6 old black and white monitors, one for each pump, the parking lot, the aisles, and the back storage area. Around 2:45 a.m., I saw movement on the pump camera. A figure. Someone standing between pumps 3 and 4, just outside the pool of light. They weren't buying gas or moving, just standing there. I thought maybe a customer had broken down, so I went to the door and looked out. Nothing. The lot was empty. When I looked back at the monitors, the figure was gone. I brushed it off as a camera glitch. They were ancient, after all. But an hour later, when I went outside to empty the trash, I felt it. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and I scanned the lot. Nothing but fields and darkness. The road stretched for miles, but there wasn't a single pair of headlights in sight. The woods across the street were pitch black. No wind, no movement, just still. The following night, it got stranger. Around the same time, 2:45 a.m., I saw something again on the monitors. This time, it was clearer. A man. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, standing at the edge of the woods across the street. He wasn't moving, just facing the gas station. I leaned closer to the monitor, but before I could get a good look, the feed glitched and went black for a few seconds. When it came back, he was gone. That was the first night I called Tom. He sounded half asleep when he answered, told me it was probably a trick of the light or a camera reflection. "Don't worry about it," he said. "You'll get used to the weird hours." But I wasn't imagining it. Every night after that, the figure was there. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, always around 2:45 a.m., sometimes by the pumps, sometimes at the tree line, always watching. One night, I decided to confront it. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe defiance, but I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the edge of the parking lot. The air was cold, still, almost too quiet. I shined the flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. I took a few steps closer. My heart was pounding, and I could feel sweat prickling my neck despite the chill. Then I saw something move, just a flicker of motion, something darting between the trees. Too fast to be human. I backed away slowly, keeping the light aimed at the woods. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, just barely audible over the hum of the highway in the distance. It said my name. I froze. The flashlight flickered. I dropped it and ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I checked the monitors. Nothing there. But I knew what I heard. I knew it said my name. After that night, I started keeping the door locked at all times. I stopped going outside after midnight. I even brought my own small baseball bat to work, just in case. But the feeling never left. It got worse. Some nights, I'd hear faint tapping on the glass doors. Other times, I'd see something flash across the monitor screens too fast to identify. A blur of movement that made my stomach twist. One early morning, around 4:10 a.m., I was restocking the back fridge when I heard the bell on the front door chime. I froze. I hadn't seen anyone pull in, and I hadn't unlocked the door. I stepped out and saw a man standing at the counter. Tall, dark coat, pale skin. His face was too long, his eyes sunken, his expression blank but focused on me. "Sorry," I said, trying to stay calm. "We're closed for cleaning right now." He didn't respond, just stood there, head tilted slightly, watching me. His mouth twitched, like he wanted to smile but didn't know how. I glanced toward the door. It was still locked. I looked back. and he was gone. Just gone. No sound, no movement, nothing. I checked the cameras in panic. The monitors showed no one. The door hadn't opened. There was no record of anyone entering or leaving. I sat down behind the counter, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I called Tom again, but this time he didn't answer. The rest of the shift was a blur. Every sound made me jump. When dawn finally came, I clocked out and went home, feeling like my mind was unraveling. I told myself I'd quit, but I didn't. I needed the money too badly. A few days later, something happened that still keeps me up at night. It was around 3 a.m., raining hard. The parking lot was slick and reflective, the streetlights casting long, watery shadows. I was wiping down the counter when the power went out. Everything, lights, fridges, cameras, dead silent. I grabbed my flashlight and radioed the gas station next town over, but no response. Then I heard it again, the whisper. At first it was faint, just a soft murmur coming from somewhere near the glass doors. Then it got louder, closer. My name over and over, like someone was right outside whispering through the crack in the door. I shined my flashlight toward the entrance and froze. There was a face pressed against the glass. Pale, wet, mouth open just slightly, eyes completely black. It was smiling. I stumbled backward and knocked over a display. The light flickered, and the face was gone. The whispering stopped. I waited in silence, every nerve screaming. Then I saw something move in the reflection of the cooler door, something behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing there. The flashlight beam trembled as I tried to steady my hand. The lights flickered back on a few seconds later, and I saw wet footprints on the tile floor. Human footprints, leading from the door toward the back of the store and stopping right behind the counter where I had been standing. I couldn't breathe. I ran to the back office, locked the door, and stayed there until sunrise. When Tom came in that morning, I tried to tell him what happened, but he just looked tired. "You're not the first one to see him," he said quietly. "Don't talk about it. Just do your job. Keep your head down." "What do you mean not the first?" I asked. He sighed. "We've lost a few night guys over the years. Some quit, some just stopped showing up. I used to work nights myself. He always shows up around 3. Don't look for him. Don't answer if he calls your name." That was the last thing he said before walking away. I lasted 2 more nights before I couldn't take it anymore. On my last shift, I unplugged the monitors, blasted music from my phone, and refused to look outside. Still, around 2:45 a.m., I heard it again, a faint tapping on the glass. I didn't look. I didn't move. The tapping turned into scratching, like fingernails dragging across the door. Then the voice came. "Please," it whispered. "Let me in." I didn't move. I just sat there, tears in my eyes, heart hammering. The sound stopped after a few minutes. When I looked up at the clock, it was 3:13 a.m. The rest of the night was silent. I quit the next morning. Didn't even pick up my last paycheck. A week later, I drove by the station out of morbid curiosity. It was closed. Police tape across the doors. I found out later from a local news site that a man on the night shift had gone missing. The cameras caught him unlocking the front door at 2:47 a.m. No one ever saw him again. Now, years later, I still dream about that place. Sometimes I see the monitors flickering. Sometimes I hear that voice whispering from the darkness. Every time I pass an empty gas station at night, I feel it. The pull of the dark beyond the glass, the thing waiting patiently just outside, watching, whispering, waiting for me to open the door. I don't work nights anymore. I never will again. But sometimes late at night, when I'm half asleep, I hear faint tapping on my bedroom window, and I swear I hear it say my name. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I clocked in at the hospital, my second job keeping me busy through the night. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the empty corridors, the smell of antiseptic sharp in my nostrils. I had been working night shifts for nearly a year now, but something about tonight felt off, an uneasy weight pressing against the sterile walls. I shrugged it off at first, telling myself it was just fatigue. The night was long, the hospital eerily quiet, and the patients fewer than usual. Most had been discharged earlier in the day, leaving the halls echoing with nothing but the occasional beep from machines that never slept. I walked past the nurse's station, nodding at Linda, the night supervisor. She barely looked up, her eyes glued to the screen in front of her. I had never been a particularly social person, so the silence didn't bother me. until the faint sound of shuffling came from the end of the hall. I paused, straining to listen. It was subtle, almost like someone dragging a foot across the floor. I told myself it was just another night shift quirk, the sound of janitors or cleaning crews doing their rounds. But no one else should be here at this hour. I turned the corner and the sound stopped. My stomach tightened, the kind of gut feeling that tells you something is very wrong. I tried to shake it off and continued toward the supply closet to grab some sterile gloves. As I bent down to open the door, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. A figure, a man, was standing at the far end of the hall, just inside the shadows. I froze, holding my breath. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't respond. My pulse quickened, and I realized something. No one should be standing there. The hall was supposed to be empty. I stepped closer, and as the light flickered overhead, he vanished. Just like that. My rational mind scrambled to explain it. A trick of the shadows, maybe a reflection in the polished floor, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to focus on my work, checking vitals, updating charts, making my rounds. But every time I turned a corner, I felt it, like eyes on me, heavy and cold. I started hearing things, faint whispers just at the edge of perception. Sometimes it was my name, sometimes just unintelligible murmurs that made my stomach churn. I told myself I was imagining it, that night shifts played tricks on your mind, but it wasn't just my mind. By 2 a.m., the feeling had grown stronger. I was alone in the pediatric wing, restocking supplies, when I heard the laughter. Children's laughter, sharp and brittle, echoing down the empty hall. I froze, realizing that every patient had been discharged that afternoon. There were no children here. My breath caught, and I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by the sound of tiny footsteps running toward me. I spun around, but the hall was empty. I called Linda on the walkie-talkie, my voice shaky. "Linda, are you around? Something's not right." There was static on the line, then her voice, distant and distorted. "What do you mean? Who's there?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't mentioned anyone else being in the hospital, and yet her voice sounded confused, afraid. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I was shaking now, and every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run out into the night. But the hospital had strict security protocols for night staff, and if I left without checking out, there would be questions I couldn't answer. I forced myself to move down the hall, checking doors, rooms, closets, anywhere someone could be hiding. Nothing. Every space was empty, yet the feeling didn't leave. Something was there, moving just out of sight, watching me. By 3 a.m., I had reached the ICU. I needed to check on Mr. Hargrove, a patient recovering from heart surgery. He was the only patient left in the ICU tonight. The monitors were beeping steadily, but when I approached his bed, I noticed something strange. His eyes were open. I froze. That wasn't unusual by itself, but he wasn't supposed to be awake yet, and when I leaned in closer, he whispered, "Don't look behind you." I spun around, heart racing, and the room was empty, but I could feel it, the presence just behind me. The air grew colder, a sharp chill crawling up my spine. I wanted to leave, to run, but my legs felt like lead. I forced myself to finish my check, adjusting his IV, making sure everything was in place. Every beep of the monitor felt like a countdown, every shadow a threat. Then I saw it, a figure, tall and thin, standing in the corner. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel the weight of its gaze. It tilted its head almost inquisitively and then stepped closer. My legs finally obeyed my desperate mind, and I ran. Down the hall, past empty patient rooms, past the supply closet, past the nurse's station, which was now empty, even though Linda had been there moments ago. The hall seemed to stretch, endless, and every corner I turned, I saw it again, closer, moving faster. I reached the main entrance, fumbling with a security keycard. It felt slippery in my hands, slick as if covered in something wet. I finally swiped it and pushed the door open, running out into the parking lot, the cold night air hitting my face. I looked back once, and the lights of the hospital flickered, shadows stretching across the building in impossible ways. I tried to call my friend when I got to my car, but my phone was dead. The battery had been full when I left my apartment. I sat in the car, engine running, every nerve screaming, listening for movement, and then I heard it, Soft, deliberate footsteps approaching my car. I locked the doors and stared out the windshield. Nothing. Not a soul. But I knew I wasn't alone. The next day, I tried to tell Linda and the other staff what had happened. They laughed it off, claiming it was stress, fatigue, or a prank. I knew better. And then, when I returned for the next night shift, I found a note tucked under the door of the staff room. It read simply, "You can't leave yet." I left the hospital that night, never to return for another shift. But the memory didn't leave me. Weeks later, I would wake up at night to the sound of children laughing outside my window, footsteps pacing my apartment hallway, and whispers calling my name from empty rooms. Friends told me it was paranoia, that I should see someone. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. Something had followed me home. Months passed and I tried to resume a normal life, but the feeling never left. I moved apartments, changed jobs, tried to ignore the shadows at the edge of my vision. But at night, when the world is quiet, the whispers return. My dreams are no longer my own. They replay the halls of that hospital, the laughter of children who shouldn't exist, the silent gaze of the figure that had followed me. I began researching the hospital's history, desperate for an explanation. I found accounts of patients disappearing during the night, staff quitting abruptly, unexplained deaths. One report from decades ago mentioned a janitor who died in a fire. His body never recovered. Staff had claimed they sometimes saw him wandering the halls at night, eyes hollow, dragging one leg behind him. I didn't know if that was the same presence I felt, but I knew one thing. It wasn't bound by time or death. It lingered, patient, waiting for the next shift worker to wander the halls alone. Even now, years later, I cannot walk past a hospital without a shiver crawling up my spine. The fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the soft hum of machines, they all remind me of that night, of the figure that watched me, of the laughter that wasn't real, of the whispers that never stop. I no longer work night shifts. I no longer visit hospitals after dark. And yet sometimes when the world is silent and I am alone, I swear I can hear it. The dragging footsteps, the soft giggle, the voice whispering my name from just beyond the shadows. I don't know why it targeted me or if it still follows. But I do know this, the night shift changes people. It opens doors to things that should not be seen. And some doors once opened can never truly be closed. Story the end. It was around 10:45 p.m. when I pulled into the employee parking lot behind Ridgefield Memorial Hospital. The night air was heavy with mist, that late autumn chill that clings to your skin and settles deep in your clothes. My shift started at 11 sharp. I'd been working nights there for almost a year, mostly doing security in the older section of the building, the one the staff jokingly called the Ghost Wing. It was originally part of the main hospital built in the 1940s, but most of it had been shut down after they expanded in the 90s. Only a few storage rooms, maintenance areas, and the basement morgue still operated in that section. I didn't mind the graveyard shift. Fewer people meant fewer problems. Most nights were quiet, just rounds, logging activity, keeping an eye on the cameras, and occasionally walking a nurse to her car when she felt uneasy. But something about that night felt different. I noticed it before I even clocked in. The automatic doors at the staff entrance opened slower than usual, groaning like the gears inside were sticking. When I walked in, the fluorescent lights in the hallway flickered in a pulsing rhythm that made my eyes ache. Marla, the night receptionist, was sitting behind the desk with her earbuds in, sipping from a large styrofoam cup. She looked exhausted. I gave her a nod, and she pulled out one earbud. "You're late, Nate," she said, smirking a little. "By 5 minutes," I replied. "You gonna write me up?" She grinned. "Not my job. But be careful. Hughes has been lurking around tonight." Great. The supervisor. He was one of those guys who got off on nitpicking every little thing. I clocked in quickly, signed the nightly report log, and headed toward the security office. The cameras covered the main hospital wings, the emergency department, and a few of the older sections, including the east hallway that led to the basement morgue. That hallway always gave me the creeps, even when I first started. The walls were narrow and curved slightly downward, and the old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, some of them dead entirely. The air down there always felt colder, like the temperature just dropped the further you went. My first round went as usual. I made my way through the newer wings first. Emergency, ICU, pediatrics, nodding to the few nurses and doctors still on duty. Most of them knew me by name. One of them, Clara, gave me a half wave as she wheeled a medicine cart past me. Quiet night? I asked. So far, she said, but give it another hour. I smiled. Hospitals never really sleep. The night just feels slower. By midnight, I'd finished my first sweep and was back in the security office watching the monitors. There was a small space heater humming under my desk, and I had the volume turned low on the camera feeds. That's when I noticed something. On the monitor for the east hallway, the one leading to the morgue, there was movement. It was subtle at first, like the flicker of light or a shadow. I leaned closer, squinting at the grainy black and white feed. The timestamp read 12:06 a.m. A shape moved across the far end of the hallway, too fast to identify. The thing was, that section wasn't supposed to have anyone in it. Maintenance had locked it after hours. Only the morgue technician, Howard, had clearance to be down there, and he'd already gone home around 9. I picked up my radio. Marla, anyone supposed to be down near the old East Wing? She paused before responding. Not that I know of. You want me to call Hughes? Not yet, I said. I'll check it out first. I grabbed my flashlight and set out, cutting through the dim corridors until I reached the old wing. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The hum of machines and soft chatter of nurses faded until it was just the echo of my boots against linoleum. When I turned down the east hallway, the air changed. I could see my breath faintly in the beam of my flashlight. The smell down there was distinct, a mix of disinfectant, old paper, and something metallic. Halfway down, I stopped. One of the motion sensor lights flickered on near the morgue entrance, though I hadn't reached that point yet. It stayed on for several seconds, then went dark again. Hello? I called out. My voice echoed sharply off the tile. Security. If anyone's here, you need to announce yourself. No response. I checked the morgue door. The padlock was in place. No signs of tampering. When I reached for the handle, I noticed something strange, a faint smudge of reddish-brown on the lock itself. It wasn't thick, but it looked fresh. I took a step back, uneasy. Marla, I said into the radio, you sure Howard clocked out earlier? She came back after a moment. Yeah, signed out at 9:03. Why? Because I'm down by the morgue and the light sensors are tripping. Looks like someone's been messing with the door. Want me to call Hughes? I hesitated, staring down the hallway. Not yet. I'll finish checking it out. I walked back toward the elevator that led up to the main corridor. As I passed one of the old storage rooms, I heard something, a faint tapping sound coming from inside. It was slow, deliberate, like someone tapping their finger against glass. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I tried the door handle. Locked. There were still old surgical supplies and files in those rooms, nothing anyone should need at night. I flicked my light under the crack at the bottom of the door. I could see the edge of a metal table leg and what looked like a box on the floor. Nothing else. Then the tapping started again, but this time it came from inside the wall. I backed up, heart thudding in my chest. The sound was faint but rhythmic. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more taps, like knocking. I radioed again. Marla, can you check the maintenance log for the East Wing? Any workers scheduled for overnight? She sighed. Nope, just you and the nurses. You okay? Yeah, I said, though I didn't believe it. I'll head back to the office. When I got there, I replayed the camera footage from earlier. The figure I'd seen wasn't just a shadow. It was a person. Tall, wearing something long, maybe a coat or gown. The figure appeared for only a few seconds at the end of the hall before vanishing near the morgue. I leaned in, adjusting the brightness. As the image clarified, my stomach dropped. The figure's head was tilted sharply to one side, almost unnaturally, like the neck was bent. Before I could process that, the monitor flickered. Static rolled across the screen. Then the feed from the east hallway went black. Marla, I lost camera 14, I said quickly. I'm seeing that too, she replied. Everything else looks fine. Maybe a wiring issue? Maybe. But I didn't buy it. That wing's wiring had been replaced just a few months ago. I stayed glued to the monitor for the next 20 minutes, but the feed never came back. Around 1:15 a.m., I decided to make another round. This time, I took the elevator down to the basement instead of walking through the old corridor. The elevator rattled as it descended, the faint hum of the cables vibrating against the shaft. When the doors opened, the air that met me was freezing. The basement lights were dim, most of them flickering on a delay. I walked past the storage cages, checking doors as I went. When I reached the morgue, I noticed the padlock was gone. The latch hung open. "Marla," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I thought you said Howard clocked out?" "He did," she said, now sounding tense. "You sure no one's down there?" "I'm looking right at an open morgue door." "I'm calling Hughes." The hallway seemed to close in around me. I pushed the morgue door open slowly, shining my flashlight inside. The smell hit me first, something sour and chemical. The refrigeration units lined the far wall, the kind where they store bodies before transfer. 2 of the units were empty. One was closed. "Howard?" I called, though I knew he wasn't there. Something scraped softly from inside the room. I turned, scanning the corners. My flashlight beam caught on a gurney in the center. There was a white sheet draped over it, the edges tucked in neatly, like someone had just prepared a body. I took a cautious step closer. The sheet moved. I froze. It wasn't much, just a subtle twitch near the center, as if something underneath shifted. "Jesus," I whispered. "Marla, I think we've got a problem down here." No response. Just static. I took another step forward, heart hammering. The sheet moved again, more clearly this time, a slow, dragging ripple that traveled the length of the gurney. Then it stopped. I reached out, grabbed the corner of the sheet, and yanked it back. The gurney was empty. No body, just an indentation in the mattress where something heavy had been. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The scraping sound started again, but this time it came from behind one of the storage units. I turned, light shaking in my hand, and saw a shape crouched in the dark corner. It was a man, or what looked like one. His skin was grayish, almost translucent under the light, and he was wearing what appeared to be an old hospital gown. His head was tilted at the same unnatural angle I'd seen on the camera feed. His eyes were wide open, unblinking. Before I could move, he bolted, not toward me, but toward the far wall, disappearing into the shadows behind the refrigeration units. I ran after him, but when I reached the back corner, there was nothing there, just a solid wall. The air felt heavier, pressing against my chest. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Marla, do you copy?" I barked into the radio. Finally, her voice came through, crackling. "Nate, what's going on? Hughes is on his way." "Don't send him down here. Something's." I stopped. The lights flickered, and the door slammed shut behind me. I ran to it, twisting the handle. Locked. The air grew colder by the second. My breath came out in clouds. Then I heard it, the tapping again. But this time it wasn't from the walls. It was coming from inside one of the refrigeration drawers. Tap, tap, tap. I backed up until I hit the gurney. The tapping got faster, louder, then suddenly stopped. Then the drawer slid open on its own. There was nothing inside. Just darkness. That was the moment I panicked. I hit the door hard with my shoulder until it finally gave way. I bolted into the hallway, heart slamming in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the elevator. When the doors opened upstairs, Hughes was waiting for me, arms crossed. "What the hell's going on, Morgan?" I must have looked pale because his expression softened. "You all right?" "There's someone down there," I said, still trying to catch my breath. "I saw him. He looked wrong." Hughes frowned. "You're sure it wasn't a transient or a patient who wandered off?" "I know what I saw." He sighed, clearly irritated. "Fine. Show me." Against every instinct screaming at me not to go back, I led him to the basement. The morgue door was closed again, the padlock dangling loosely. When he flicked on the lights, everything looked normal. No cold air, no smell, no open drawers. Even the gurney was gone. I stood there in disbelief. "Looks secure to me," Hughes said. "You probably saw a reflection or something on the camera." "I know what I saw," I repeated quietly. He shook his head. "Get some air, Morgan. You've been working too many nights." For the rest of that shift, I stayed in the security office, watching the monitors. Nothing else happened. The east hallway camera flickered back online around 3:30 a.m., showing an empty corridor. When my shift ended at 7, I left without saying much to anyone. I couldn't explain it, even to myself. But 2 nights later, I got called in early. Hughes wanted me to cover an extra hour because the other guard was out sick. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was a piece of yellow tape across the door to the old wing. "What's going on?" I asked Marla. Her face was pale. "They found Howard down there this morning." My stomach turned. Found him? What do you mean? In the morgue, she whispered. Inside one of the drawers. They said he must have gotten trapped somehow. I stared at her, unable to speak. They said it looked like he'd been dead for days. I left that job a week later. I never told anyone what I'd seen that night. But sometimes when I wake up around midnight, I swear I can still hear that faint tapping sound. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. It's been almost 4 years now and I still can't shake it. Story, the end. It was the fall of 2019 when I started working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station in rural Ohio. The place was small, isolated, and sat off a stretch of highway that barely saw traffic after dark. It wasn't my dream job, but I needed something steady after losing my previous one, and the quiet nights appealed to me. At least, that's what I thought at first. The first few weeks were uneventful, mostly truckers passing through, the occasional late-night traveler, and local teenagers coming in for snacks. The store had that stale smell of coffee and old mop water, and the fluorescent lights hummed constantly, casting a sickly glow over everything. Around 2 a.m., the world seemed to stop moving, the only sound being the distant chirp of crickets and the hum of the refrigerator units in the back. But by my 3rd week, I started noticing odd things. Small, subtle details that made my skin crawl. One night, around 1:45 a.m., a man came in wearing an old brown jacket and jeans caked with mud. He didn't say a word, just stood at the door for a while, staring at the security mirrors near the ceiling. When I greeted him, he didn't respond. After a few seconds, he turned and walked into aisle 3, the one with canned goods. I remember looking down at the register for maybe 10 seconds. When I looked back up, he was gone. Completely gone. I checked every aisle, the bathroom, even outside near the pumps. Nothing. No truck, no footprints in the damp gravel outside. I even replayed the security footage, and that's when my blood ran cold. The video showed the front door opening, but no one coming in, just the motion sensor light flicking on, the air chime sounding, and the door swinging shut again. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe I was just tired, but the next night, something else happened. Around 3:10 a.m., I went to restock the cooler in the back. When I came out, I saw the coffee pot steaming, like someone had just poured a cup, but I hadn't made one, and there was no one else in the store. I checked the counter. One of the paper cups was sitting there, filled halfway, still warm. The next morning, I asked Kyle, the day shift guy, if he'd noticed anything strange. He laughed and said, "You finally saw him, huh?" I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He told me that everyone who'd worked nights eventually experienced weird shit. Sometimes footsteps in the stockroom, sometimes voices over the intercom when no one was on the mic. "Just ignore it," he said. "It gets worse if you acknowledge it." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Around 2:30 a.m., a black pickup truck pulled up. The headlights stayed on, blindingly bright. I waited for someone to get out, but the doors never opened. After a few minutes, I stepped outside to take a look. The truck was running, but no one was inside. I swear to God, the keys were in the ignition, the radio playing softly, a preacher talking about souls and fire, but there wasn't a soul in sight. I went back inside and locked the doors. The second I did, the radio inside the store, one that hadn't worked since my first week, crackled to life. "Don't look outside," a voice whispered. I froze. The sound was low, static-filled, but I swear I heard my name. "Evan." I unplugged the radio, my hands shaking, but it kept playing for a few seconds after it lost power. I bolted to the back room and stayed there until sunrise. When Kyle came in, I told him everything. He didn't even seem surprised. "You shouldn't have gone outside," he said. "That's when they start noticing you." The next night, I almost didn't go in, but the bills didn't care how scared I was. It was raining when I arrived, the kind of cold drizzle that made everything smell like metal and dirt. Around 12:50 a.m., I heard footsteps above the ceiling tiles, slow, dragging ones. There was no second floor. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it upward. The noise stopped. When I turned off the flashlight, the sound started again, this time closer, like someone was crawling just above the tiles. Then dust fell from the ceiling vents, and I saw fingers, pale, grayish-white fingers, pressing against the vent grating. I stumbled back, slamming into the coffee counter, spilling the pot across the floor. The vent creaked. Then it stopped. I stood there shaking for what felt like hours before I finally climbed onto a chair to check it out. The metal grate was bent inward, like something had forced its way through. I didn't tell Kyle about that. I didn't want to sound insane. Over the next few days, things escalated. The motion sensors in the aisles kept going off when the store was empty. The back door alarm would beep in the middle of the night, even though it was deadbolted. One night around 3:30, the store lights flickered, and I saw someone standing outside by pump 4, a woman in a hospital gown, her hair hanging wet over her face. I grabbed the phone to call the police, but the line was dead. When I looked up again, she was gone. The cameras caught her for just one frame, a blurred shape but distinctly human. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. By the end of the week, I was barely holding it together. I told the manager I needed to switch to days, but he just laughed. Everyone says that eventually, he said. The nights get in your head. My final night there was November 2nd. I remember every minute of it. The first few hours were calm. I started to think maybe I'd imagined everything, but around 2 a.m., the power flickered. The emergency lights kicked on, casting everything in a dull red glow. The security cameras blinked off, then back on, one by one. That's when I saw it. On the monitor, ISIL 2. Something tall. Not a person. Too thin. Too long. It stood at the end of the aisle, motionless, head tilted at an unnatural angle. My chest went tight. I switched to the live feed of the front of the store. Nothing there. I looked back at aisle 2. Empty. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward aisle 2, every step echoing in that dead silence. The air smelled faintly of rot. When I turned the corner, I saw movement at the end of the aisle. A hand, reaching around the shelf, fingers curling like it was beckoning me. I backed away, trembling. Then all the lights went out. The only thing I could hear was breathing. Not mine. Heavy, slow, close. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on, and for a split second, I saw a face inches from mine. Not a normal face. Eyes too wide, mouth gaping, skin gray and stretched too tight. Then it was gone. I ran for the door, slamming into it full force, but it wouldn't budge. The lock wouldn't turn. My keys wouldn't fit. I could see the highway outside just a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. I turned around, and in the red emergency light, I saw them. Figures. 5, 6, maybe more, standing in the aisles, watching me. Some had faces, some didn't. One of them looked exactly like me. The last thing I remember was a voice, soft and close to my ear. You shouldn't have stayed. I woke up the next morning in the parking lot, the sun blinding my eyes. The store was locked, untouched, everything in perfect order. My car was still there, but my keys were inside the locked store. I quit that day. A month later, the gas station closed down after an unexplained fire. No one was inside when it happened. The manager said the cameras caught static right before the flames started at 3:33 a.m. Sometimes when I drive past the empty lot, I swear I see the lights flicker inside the ruins, faintly glowing red like the emergency lamps that night. And once I thought I saw someone standing by the pumps, wearing an old brown jacket, watching me. Story the end. It was a quiet Tuesday night when I arrived at the warehouse for my night shift. The building sat on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, a hulking gray structure with broken windows patched up with plywood and the faint smell of oil and rust lingering in the air. I had been working nights here for a little over a month, mostly stocking shelves, monitoring shipments, and occasionally dealing with the odd vagrant who tried to sneak in. The job wasn't glamorous, but the pay was decent, and the night shift bonus made it worth the solitude. I clocked in at 10:45 p.m., grabbed my flashlight, and started my usual rounds. The warehouse was massive, rows upon rows of towering metal shelves, boxes stacked high, and forklifts parked like dormant beasts. The place had its own rhythm at night, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe, the faint scurrying of rats in the corners. I had grown used to it, even found a strange comfort in the emptiness. Around 11:30 p.m., as I was checking inventory in aisle 7, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing behind me. Heavy, deliberate, slow. I turned quickly, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the aisle was empty, just rows of cardboard boxes and steel shelving. Must be a rat, I muttered to myself, trying to shrug it off. I continued my work, but the sense of being watched didn't leave me. By midnight, I was on my way to check the far end of the warehouse, a section mostly used for old, unsorted shipments. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically here, casting long, twitching shadows along the floor. I hated this part of the building during the day. At night, it was worse. As I stepped into aisle 23, I heard it again. Slow, dragging footsteps. Only this time, they weren't coming from behind me. They were ahead, echoing off the metal shelving, muffled yet distinct. I froze, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. The air felt heavier, and a cold draft whispered past my neck. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Is someone here?" No answer. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. After all, warehouses had weird acoustics. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A figure. At the very end of the aisle, just between the shelves, stood a man, or something that looked like a man. He was tall, unnaturally thin, dressed in dark, indistinct clothing. His head was tilted slightly, like he was studying me. I froze, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The figure didn't move at first. Then, ever so slowly, it raised one arm and pointed at me. Not a greeting, not a wave, a single deliberate point. My heart was hammering and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. "Who are you?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. No response. I backed up slowly, trying to keep the beam of my flashlight trained on him. As I did, he began to move, not walking, but gliding, silently, effortlessly along the floor. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. I turned and ran. I don't even remember how I got to the office, but I slammed the door shut, locked it, and called my manager. No answer. I tried security. No answer. My phone battery was dying. I was trapped. Then I heard it. A low, guttural laugh coming from somewhere in the warehouse. It wasn't human. It was hollow, wet, echoing. My flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness. I crouched behind the office desk trying to calm my breathing when I felt it. The air shift like someone had just walked past me, close enough to brush against my shoulder. My skin crawled and I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Then I heard it again. The dragging footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I pressed myself against the desk, hoping it wouldn't see me. A shadow appeared at the office window. It was him. The same tall, thin figure staring directly at me. I could see no features, just the outline of his body and the way he tilted his head unnaturally. The window rattled slightly, as if he were tapping on the glass. I grabbed a metal rod from under the desk, shaking, ready to defend myself. The shadow pressed closer to the window, then, without warning, it was gone. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the night. I didn't move from the office until my relief arrived at 6 a.m. I didn't tell them what I saw. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. After that night, I started noticing more strange things. Boxes that had been neatly stacked would be in disarray when I returned to the aisle. Pallets would be moved. Security cameras sometimes showed static in certain corners. I even found a pair of muddy footprints leading to an empty aisle, disappearing mysteriously into thin air. Weeks went by, and the sightings increased. Employees on the day shift would sometimes hear a dragging sound at night, but never saw anything. Some claimed the place was haunted. I didn't want to believe it, but my own experiences made denial impossible. One night, 2 months after the first encounter, I was in the back of the warehouse alone, performing a routine inventory check. The power flickered and the lights went out for a few seconds. When they came back, he was there again, standing at the end of aisle 32, pointing at me. This time, I ran, faster than I ever had. I didn't stop until I was outside in the freezing night, gasping for air. The building loomed behind me, dark and silent, except for the faint hum of the security lights. I never returned to that warehouse for a night shift. I quit immediately. Years later, I learned that the warehouse had a history. A worker had disappeared there in the late 1970s. They never found him. Some say he was crushed under a pallet, others that he simply vanished. Employees over the decades have reported strange sightings, shadows moving, whispers in the dark, and footsteps with no one there. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know. All I know is that every time I close my eyes at night, I see him, tall, thin, pointing at me from the end of an endless aisle. I hear the dragging footsteps echoing in my head and the cold air brushing past my shoulder. I will never work a night shift again. Story the end. It was the winter of 2016 when I took a job as a night custodian at an old regional hospital in upstate New York. The hospital had been built in the late 1950s, and though most of the upper floors were still active, the lower levels had long since been closed off. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I was assigned primarily to the basement corridors, places no one really went unless something needed deep cleaning or repair. The pay was decent, and I didn't have many options. I'd been laid off from my warehouse job 2 months earlier, and my rent was late. When I started, the day supervisor, a heavyset woman named June, warned me not to wander too far down into the older sections. Just stick to the rooms on your list, she said. The rest of that floor isn't used anymore. They sealed off a lot of it after the renovation. At first, it sounded like standard workplace talk. Hospitals are filled with off-limits areas. Maintenance tunnels, old patient wards, places full of asbestos and bad wiring. But there was something in her tone, the way she said it, that made me feel like there was more to it. The first few nights were uneventful. I listened to music, mopped long empty hallways, and polished floors that barely anyone walked on. The air always had a cold, chemical smell, and the hum of the ventilation system echoed through the concrete corridors. I didn't see many people, just the occasional nurse taking the elevator to deliver labs or a security guard making rounds. By the fifth night, I was used to the routine. But that night, around 2:30 a.m., I started hearing something odd. It was faint at first, soft knocking sounds coming from somewhere beyond the old laundry chute near the end of the hallway. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I paused my mop and listened. The pattern repeated every few minutes. It wasn't loud enough to be a pipe banging or machinery running. It sounded rhythmic, deliberate, like someone was trying to get attention. I walked toward the chute, my flashlight beam cutting through the dim corridor. The chute was sealed, just a metal hatch with a "Do Not Use" sign taped across it. The sound stopped as soon as I got close. When I mentioned it to the security guard later, his name was Luis. He frowned. "You were working near the old psych wing, weren't you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" he sighed. "That area is supposed to be locked down. People used to hear things down there all the time. Screams, knocking, weird humming. They sealed it off after they moved patients to the new building, but..." He trailed off, glancing toward the elevator. "Just don't go poking around there, man." I laughed it off, but that night when I got home, I couldn't shake the sound of those knocks. It wasn't just the noise, it was the way it stopped the moment I got close, like whoever was making it knew I was there. The next night, I tried to avoid that hallway entirely, but the way the cleaning schedule worked, I had to pass through it eventually. Around 3:10 a.m., I heard it again. This time louder, echoing faintly down the concrete walls. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, every instinct telling me to ignore it. But I couldn't help myself. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "Hello?" I said softly. For a few seconds, nothing. Then 3 knocks in reply. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't random. It was a response. I told June about it the next morning, but she just looked tired. "We've had incidents in that area before," she said carefully. "You're not the first person to report sounds like that. It's just an old building. The pipes echo strangely down there." Her words didn't convince me. I could tell by her expression that she didn't believe what she was saying. By the end of that week, I started noticing other things. Tools I left in one spot would be moved when I came back. My mop bucket rolled a few feet on its own. Once I found an old hospital ID badge lying in the middle of the hallway. Yellowed, cracked plastic with a photo of a nurse named Marion Holt. The date on it said 1981. I kept it in my cart, thinking it might belong to someone still working there. But when I showed it to one of the nurses upstairs, she turned pale. "Marion, you found that downstairs?" she whispered. When I nodded, she said, "She died here, long time ago, back when the psych wing was still active. They said she..." She stopped, glancing around, then lowered her voice. "She hanged herself in one of the laundry rooms. Her body wasn't found for 2 days." That night, I was scheduled for double duty because another custodian called out sick. I had to clean the old stairwell leading down to the boiler room, a narrow, steep descent lit by a single flickering bulb. The air grew colder as I went down, and I could see my breath. At the bottom, the corridor split into two directions, one toward the boilers, one toward the sealed-off wing. The door to that wing had been welded shut, thick steel bars across it, or so I thought. When I turned the corner, the door was slightly open. My first thought was that maintenance had unsealed it for inspection, but there was no sign of anyone else down there. No tools, no lights, no sound except the hum of the ventilation. The metal door creaked open an inch wider, slow, deliberate. I told myself it was the draft, but it didn't feel like that. It felt intentional. I shined my flashlight into the darkness beyond. The beam barely penetrated, but I could make out old hospital beds lined up against the walls, rusted and overturned, faded paint peeled from the tiles. The smell, stale, moldy, faintly metallic, hit me like a wave. Something moved. Just at the edge of the light, a quick, darting motion low to the ground. My hand tightened on the flashlight. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. Nothing. Just the sound of dripping water. Then I heard whispering. Not words exactly, more like breathy murmurs, multiple voices overlapping. They seemed to echo from deeper in the corridor, faint but unmistakable. The air felt heavy, charged, like static electricity crawling across my skin. I stepped back, heart pounding, and reached for the door to pull it shut. But just before I did, something caught the light, a shape standing farther down the hallway. A woman. She was wearing an old nurse's uniform, pale and faded. Her hair hung in front of her face. She stood completely still, but the way she was angled, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at something behind me. I turned around. Nothing there. When I looked back, she was gone. I slammed the door shut and ran up the stairs so fast I nearly fell. I didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway. When I finally caught my breath, I saw muddy footprints on the clean floor, bare, small, leading away from the stairwell. That was the first night I seriously considered quitting, but I didn't. I told myself I couldn't afford to lose another job, that my mind was probably playing tricks on me from sleep deprivation. 2 nights later, the power went out around 3 a.m., total darkness. The emergency lights flickered dimly, casting long shadows across the hallway. I was in the basement again, near the sealed wing. I could barely see, so I used my flashlight and headed for the elevator. As I passed the chute, I heard it again. The knocking. Only this time, it wasn't 3 knocks. It was frantic, constant pounding, like someone trapped inside. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, more desperate, metal rattling against metal. I ran toward the exit, but before I could reach it, the flashlight flickered out. The pounding stopped. Then, from right behind me, a voice whispered my name. I turned, shaking. The flashlight flickered back on for a split second, and she was there. The nurse. Her face pale, eyes black, neck twisted and bruised like something had crushed it. She was inches from me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her head twitched, and then she vanished. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall, gasping for breath. The flashlight dropped from my hand and rolled, its beam catching something shiny on the floor. A hospital ID badge. The same one. Marion Holt. I quit that morning. Didn't give notice, didn't collect my last paycheck. 3 weeks later, I saw a news story online. A worker at the hospital had gone missing during the night shift. They found his cleaning cart near the boiler room. His flashlight and ID badge were left on the floor. The door to the old psych wing was open again. No one ever saw him again. Every so often, I still dream about those halls. I hear the knocking, the whispering, the sound of metal echoing in the dark. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear faint knocking somewhere inside my apartment. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I don't answer. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I first noticed something off. I worked the night shift at a small, family-owned gas station on the outskirts of a suburban town in Ohio. The streets were dead quiet, except for the occasional hum of a car passing by, which wasn't often. I had been doing this job for nearly 6 months, enough to get used to the monotony, but not enough to grow entirely immune to the eerie sensation of being alone in a place meant to be constantly active. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. I remember checking the security cameras after filling the soda cooler, and I saw a figure standing just outside the sliding glass doors. At first, I thought it was a customer, maybe a teenager looking to grab a snack, but as I watched, the figure didn't move toward the door. It just stood there, motionless, staring at the camera, or maybe through the glass at me. I called out, "Hey, you need something?" But there was no response, not a word, not a sound. Eventually, the figure walked slowly out of the camera's frame, and I shook my head, thinking I'd imagined it. Around 2:30 a.m., the first real incident happened. I was stacking boxes of chips in the back when I heard the bell above the door chime. Thinking it was a customer, I went to the counter, but the floor was empty. The chill in the air was unnatural, like the AC was cranked to freezing, yet the thermometer said 72 degrees. I frowned, scanning the store, and that's when I saw the reflection in the front window. There was someone standing in the middle of the aisle behind me, but when I turned, no one was there. My heart started pounding, and I convinced myself it was a trick of the fluorescent lights. By 3 a.m., the atmosphere felt heavier. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and bend unnaturally. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the storage room, like fingernails against cardboard. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was rats or maybe just my imagination. I unlocked the storage room door, shined my flashlight inside, and there was nothing. Then came the whispering. It was so faint I almost didn't notice it, but it was there. Soft, unintelligible, coming from somewhere near the soda cooler. I strained to listen, and suddenly it stopped. I took a few steps toward the cooler, my heart in my throat. My flashlight caught something, a smear on the glass that looked like a handprint, except it was too high for a human hand. I touched it, and it was cold. I don't mean room temperature cold. I mean icy, like it had come from outside in January. I tried to shake it off and went back to cleaning the counter. I was trying to rationalize everything when the first real confrontation happened. The bell above the door chimed again, and I spun around expecting to see someone, but the door was still locked. I grabbed the intercom and said, "Hello? Can I help you?" There was no response, just the faint sound of breathing, slow, steady, right behind me. I turned, and there was nothing. I told myself to calm down, to think rationally. Maybe it was the stress of the night shift, the lack of sleep, or maybe it was the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I moved to the back room to grab a mop, and that's when I heard it. A faint tapping, like someone was drumming their fingers against the wall. I froze, listening. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it sounded like it was coming from inside my skull. My vision blurred, and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. I grabbed the mop and slowly backed into the aisle, scanning every corner. That's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the darkness around it, moving against the flow of the aisle. It didn't walk. It glided, as if it were floating. And then I noticed its face, or rather, the absence of one. There were no features, just a void where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I froze in terror, unable to move, unable to scream. The shadow drifted closer, and I swear I could feel its coldness wrapping around me, seeping into my skin. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, like before it vanished. 1 second it was there, and the next, it was gone. I was shaking, drenched in sweat despite the chill in the air. I considered calling my manager, but my phone was in my car, and I couldn't bring myself to leave the store alone. I told myself to sit down, breathe, and wait it out until 6 a.m. That was a mistake. Around 4 a.m., the intercom crackled to life on its own. A voice, distorted and hollow, whispered my name. J. It repeated over and over, dragging the syllables, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I tried to respond, but my voice caught in my throat. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the ceiling, toward the speakers, but there was nothing. The voice stopped suddenly, replaced by silence, which felt even heavier, more oppressive. By 4:30 a.m., I had begun to question my sanity. I was jumping at every sound, every shadow. The bell above the door chimed again, and this time I didn't even look. I ran to the back, thinking maybe if I stayed in the storage room, it couldn't get to me. But the room felt different, smaller, constricting. I could hear whispers from outside circling the room, echoing off the walls. Then came the footsteps. Not slow footsteps, like someone walking, but deliberate, heavy steps. They weren't mine. I could feel it. They paced around the storage room around me in no discernible pattern, sometimes stopping, sometimes speeding up. I pressed myself against the far wall, holding my breath. The steps stopped, absolute silence. And then a voice right in my ear. Not through the intercom, not from outside, but inside my head. Leave. I bolted out of the storage room, sprinted to the door, yanking it open. The parking lot was empty, bathed in the weak glow of a single street lamp. My car sat there, keys in the ignition, and I didn't hesitate. I got in and locked the doors, shaking so hard I could barely start the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadow following me, but there was nothing. I didn't go back to that gas station for nearly a month. When I finally returned to pick up my paycheck, everything seemed normal. The store was spotless, the cash registers balanced, and the cameras recorded nothing unusual. My coworkers didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. But I knew what I saw, what I felt. Something had been there with me, something that wasn't human. After that night, things only got stranger. I started having nightmares that mirrored the events in the store, shadows with no faces, whispers that called my name, and footsteps that followed me even when I was awake. Friends told me it was stress, lack of sleep, or maybe a mild psychotic break, but I knew better. I couldn't unsee the void in that shadow's face, the unnatural cold, the oppressive silence. One night, a few weeks later, I decided to confront it. I went back to the store around 1 a.m., determined to prove to myself that it was nothing. The parking lot was empty, as always. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The store was silent, too silent. I walked the aisles, checking every corner, every shelf. Nothing. Then I heard it, a low, guttural breathing coming from the back room. I froze, my hands trembling. I called out, "I know you're here. Show yourself." The breathing stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then the intercom crackled to life, that same hollow, distorted voice whispering, "Why did you come back?" The hair on my arm stood up, and I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the doors. I drove home, vowing never to go back. Months later, I heard from the new night shift worker at that gas station. He told me the store was fine. No strange occurrences, no shadows, no voices. I wanted to believe him, but I didn't. Because I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting for the next person alone in that store, under the flickering fluorescent lights, when the world outside is asleep. Even now, years later, I still dream about that night. I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear the bell above the door or feel the shadow gliding behind me. Sometimes I swear I hear my name whispered through the darkness of my apartment. I haven't worked a night shift since, and I never will again, because I learned that some places, some hours, are better left alone. And some things, no matter how fleeting, are better never encountered. The memory of that night doesn't fade. It sits in the back of my mind like a dark stain I can't scrub out. Every time I drive past that gas station, I feel it, an invisible presence, watching, waiting. I don't know what it was or why it chose me, but I know this. Night shifts are more than just late hours and empty streets. Sometimes they're a doorway to something else, something that sees you when no one else does, something that follows when you're alone, and something that never forgets. I can still hear it sometimes in the silence of my apartment, in the whisper of the wind against the window. A faint, distorted voice calling my name, dragging the syllables out like claws against my ears. I try to ignore it, but I know it's only a matter of time before someone else steps into that store alone under the dim flickering lights and feels what I felt. The suffocating cold, the void where a face should be, the unshakable terror of something that isn't human, something that waits. And every time I think I've escaped it, I remember the handprint on the glass, the coldness seeping through my skin, and the shadow gliding silently behind me. Story the end. It was the middle of January, bitterly cold, the kind of night where frost etched thin white lines across the windows, and the wind scraped at the glass like a living thing. I had been working the overnight custodial shift at St. Francis Medical Center in western Pennsylvania for about 6 months. The hospital wasn't big, 3 floors, 1 small emergency department, but it had that heavy, constant hum of machinery that never stopped, even at 3 in the morning. Most nights were routine. I'd make my rounds between the main corridor, the ICU, and the basement storage rooms, mopping floors, emptying bins, keeping to myself. I didn't mind it. The hospital had its own kind of quiet, a hum of fluorescent lights and distant monitors that created a rhythm. I liked the solitude, But after what happened that night, I can't be in any hospital after dark anymore. It started around 1 a.m. I had just finished cleaning the ICU hallway and was heading down to the basement to restock paper towels. The elevator was slow, old, and made a clanging sound whenever it stopped. When the doors slid open, the fluorescent light above me flickered, throwing the hallway below into intermittent shadow. The basement was always colder, filled with the smell of disinfectant and metal. I'd been down there countless times, but that night it felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick. My footsteps echoed in a way they hadn't before. Somewhere deep in the corridor, I heard the faint sound of dripping water. I grabbed the cart, wheeled the cord toward the storage closet, and heard it, a voice. Faint, distant. Help, please. I froze. It came from further down the corridor, near the morgue. I hesitated. We weren't supposed to go near that section at night. Security protocol. It was locked most of the time anyway. But that voice, it wasn't my imagination. Help me? It was soft, fragile, like someone barely able to speak. I pushed the cart aside and started walking. The sound echoed faintly, each word dissolving into the hum of the vents. When I reached the morgue door, it was slightly open. That alone shouldn't have been possible. The security latch kept it locked unless a key card released it, and I didn't have one. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was hearing something from upstairs. A voice carrying through the vents, maybe. But then it came again, clearer this time. Please, help me. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open. The smell hit me immediately. Formaldehyde, metal, and something else. Something sweet and rotten beneath it. The overhead light buzzed faintly, flickering in and out. The room was small, 2 gurneys, 4 body drawers on the far wall, and a metal table in the center. A sheet lay draped over one of the gurneys. I stepped inside, calling out softly, "Hello? Is someone in here?" No answer. I took another step, my shoes squeaking faintly against the tile. Then the sheet moved, just a little, a slight tremor near the foot of the gurney. I froze. The voice came again, so faint it was almost a breath. Please. My hand shook as I reached for the edge of the sheet. I pulled it back an inch, just enough to see underneath. The table was empty. Nothing there. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. I stood there, frozen, my breathing loud in the still air. I fumbled for my flashlight, flicked it on, and swept the beam around the room. Empty. No one there. But when I turned toward the door, I saw it was closed. I hadn't closed it. I tried the handle. It didn't move. My heart started pounding harder. I pulled again, harder, but it was like it was sealed shut. I backed away, shining the light across the room. That's when I noticed something wrong with the drawers. One of them, the top left, was slightly open. Just a few inches, enough to see the edge of the metal tray inside. I swallowed hard. The light trembled in my hand. Then the drawer slid out an inch more, on its own. A faint scraping sound filled the room. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. Then from inside that drawer, something shifted. A soft, dragging sound. I took a step back. The drawer slid out further, slow and deliberate, like someone inside was pushing it open. The beam of my light caught something pale. A hand. Thin, almost gray, the fingers twitching slightly. That broke me. I dropped the flashlight and ran to the door, slamming against it, pulling at the handle until it gave way. I burst out into the hallway, heart hammering, flashlight clattering behind me. I didn't stop running until I was back in the elevator, the doors closing. When I reached the main floor, I went straight to the security office. The guard on duty, Frank, looked up from his monitor, startled. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half joking. I told him someone was in the morgue. I didn't care how insane it sounded. He frowned, picked up his walkie, and called another guard to meet him there. I followed, against my better judgment. When we got back down, the morgue door was locked again. Frank swiped his card, opened it, and turned on the light. The room was exactly as it should have been. The drawer was closed. The sheet lay neatly folded. My flashlight was lying in the center of the floor. They checked the logs. No one had accessed the morgue that night. No autopsies scheduled, no removals, nothing. Frank shrugged it off as stress. "You've been pulling too many overnights," he said. "Get some rest." I tried, I really did. But the next night, something else happened. Around 3 a.m., I was cleaning the second-floor surgical corridor when the lights flickered again. A woman's voice echoed faintly from one of the empty rooms. Can you help me? I froze. The room was supposed to be empty. It hadn't been used in months. I walked to the doorway and peered in. Empty bed, clean counters, no movement. Then, on the far wall, I saw something written in condensation, like breath on cold glass. 3 words, in the drawer. I backed out slowly, heart hammering. The condensation faded before my eyes, leaving only the faint reflection of my own pale face. When my shift ended, I went home and couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale hand sliding from the drawer. I told myself it was fatigue, that the mind plays tricks in the dark. But the next week, the hospital buzzed with talk. A new security guard had quit after his first night. He said he'd heard voices coming from the basement morgue. The final night I worked there, I went to clock out and found a note taped to my locker. It was an old piece of hospital stationery, yellowed at the edges. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, "Don't open drawers." I never found out who left it. I quit that same day. But sometimes, when I pass the hospital on late-night drives, I can see that one basement window still faintly lit, just a low, flickering light that shouldn't be on. And when the wind dies down, I swear I can hear that same faint voice. Please help me. Story the end. It was nearly 11 when I pulled into the small hospital's parking lot on the outskirts of rural Pennsylvania. The town was quiet that night, the streets empty, the wind gusting through skeletal trees lining the road. I worked as a night shift nurse, a job I'd held for almost 4 years, and by now I was used to the oppressive stillness that settled over the hospital once the sun went down. But that night, something felt different. I'd barely stepped into the main entrance when the air hit me, cold, damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of antiseptic mixed with something else I couldn't place. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering ever so slightly. I shrugged it off as just the usual ambiance. This hospital was old, built in the late 60s, and every night the wiring seemed to have a mind of its own. My first stop was the nurses' station on the 2nd floor. Only 2 other staff were on that shift, a young aide named Rachel, still new to nights, and security guard Hank, a grizzled man in his 50s who claimed he'd been working nights at this hospital longer than anyone could remember. Hank was quiet mostly, but his instincts were sharp. He often warned me about listening to the building, though I never really understood what he meant until that night. It started slowly. Around 11:30, Rachel reported a patient in room 210, an elderly man recovering from heart surgery, claiming she saw someone standing at the foot of his bed when she went in to check vitals. I went with her. The man, Mr. Whitaker, was sleeping peacefully, monitors steady. The room was empty. He swore someone was there, Rachel said, her voice trembling. A man in dark clothing, just standing there, watching him. I checked the room. Nothing. Just the usual sterile environment, the bed neatly made, the night light casting soft shadows. I told Rachel it was probably nerves. She was new. But the unease in her eyes told me she didn't believe me. I shrugged and made a note in the chart, hoping that would be the end of it. By midnight, things started to escalate. I was walking the main corridor when I noticed the overhead lights flickering again. That in itself wasn't unusual, but then I heard it, soft footsteps echoing behind me. I turned quickly. Empty hallway, only the faint hum of the air vents. My pulse quickened. I chalked it up to nerves and kept walking. A little after 12:15, the call bell for room 215 went off. I hurried down the hall and found the room empty. The patient, a woman recovering from a broken leg, was asleep. The alarm had stopped when I opened the door. Confused, I scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. I shook my head and called it a glitch, but then I heard the whispering. Soft, almost imperceptible, coming from the east wing. I froze. The sound was faint but distinct, like someone speaking just beyond comprehension. I followed it slowly, flashlight in hand, trying to pinpoint its source. As I approached room 218, the voice stopped. Inside, the patient, a middle-aged man with dementia, was sitting on the edge of his bed, whispering to someone invisible. "He won't let me leave," he murmured. "He says this is his floor now." I knelt beside him. "Who's your floor?" I asked gently. The man shook his head. Patrick's here. He says I can't go." The name sent a shiver down my spine. Patrick. A maintenance worker who had died in an accident in the basement a few years back. The official report said it was an accident, but rumors always swirled that it wasn't. He had been working late when a beam collapsed on him, crushing him instantly. Some of the older staff claimed his spirit never left the hospital, and some nights he was seen wandering the corridors. I never believed it until now. Rachel was standing at the doorway, pale. "I told you something's wrong," she whispered. I guided the patient back to bed, giving him a sedative. As I stepped into the hallway, my flashlight flickered. That's when I saw him, a figure standing at the far end of the hall, just inside the shadows, tall, dressed in a gray maintenance uniform, face obscured. I blinked, and he was gone. The rest of the night was a blur. Every time I turned a corner, I felt eyes on me. The air grew colder as the night deepened. Around 2:30 a.m., Hank called me over from the security office. "Motion sensors tripped by the basement," he said. "Check the cameras. Nothing there, but I swear I saw a shadow move." I followed him down to the basement entrance. The door was slightly ajar, which was odd. It was supposed to be locked after Patrick's accident. I could feel the cold seeping up from the gap, a chill that crawled into my bones. Hank pushed the door open slowly. The basement was dark, musty, filled with old pipes and broken equipment. He shined his flashlight down the corridor. That's when we saw it. At the far end, standing in the shadows, a figure motionless, just staring at us. I froze. My stomach turned. The figure slowly raised a hand, pointing at us, then vanished. The air felt heavier, the silence oppressive. We didn't linger. Back upstairs, the monitors flickered again. Every hallway camera showed static for a few seconds before returning to normal. Yet sometimes in the corner of the screen, I could swear I saw a shadow pass behind the walls. By the time morning rolled around, I was exhausted, pale, and shaky. Rachel quit shortly afterward, refusing ever to work nights again. Hank transferred to another hospital. I stayed a few more weeks, each night feeling the same oppressive weight, the same creeping sense that Patrick was watching, always lurking just out of sight. Even now, I avoid hospitals at night. I know what I saw, what I felt, a presence that never truly left, moving quietly through dark hallways, waiting. And I'll never forget the whispering, "This is my floor now." Story the end. It was almost 11 p.m. when I pulled into the parking lot of the nursing home where I worked. The lot was nearly empty, except for a few cars covered in frost, their windshields glinting under the dim yellow security lights. I always dreaded that moment, stepping out of my car, knowing the next 8 hours would be spent in that quiet, suffocating building, filled with fluorescent light and the faint smell of disinfectant and old linoleum. I worked as a night shift aide at Maple Pines Senior Care in upstate New York. The facility was small, 30 or so residents, most of them long-term. We had a handful of nurses, one janitor, and 2 aides per floor. Night shifts were usually calm. At least that's what I told myself. Most of the residents slept through the night, and the ones who didn't were usually harmless. Usually. The building itself was old, probably built in the late 1960s, and even though it had been remodeled a few times, you could still hear the bones of it creaking. The walls were painted that pale institutional green, the tiles faded from years of foot traffic. The main hallway lights dimmed automatically at 11:30, leaving everything bathed in that bluish fluorescent gloom that always made me feel like I was in a dream. I clocked in and checked the logbook. My partner for the night, Denise, had called out sick. That meant I was alone on the second floor, which housed the dementia patients. I didn't love working that floor, especially at night. The residents there weren't bad people. Most were sweet in their own way. But the unpredictable behavior, the wandering, the sudden yelling in the middle of the night, it could get unsettling fast. The nurse on duty, Lydia, handed me a clipboard. "You've got rooms 201 to 215. Keep an eye on 210. Mrs. Life Ellis keeps trying to get out of bed." I nodded. "Got it." "And check the north hallway cameras every hour," Lydia added, lowering her voice. "Maintenance still hasn't fixed the sensor lights. They keep flickering." I managed a weak laugh. "This place needs an exorcism more than maintenance." She didn't laugh back. "Don't joke like that here," she said quietly. By midnight, the building was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional squeak of the floor beneath my shoes. I'd finished helping a resident to the bathroom and was heading back toward the nurse's station when I noticed something strange. The light above room 207 was flickering on and off in a slow, rhythmic pattern. On, off, pause, on again. The motion sensors were supposed to trigger only when someone moved beneath them. I leaned into the doorway and peeked in. The room was empty. The resident, a quiet man named Henry Cole, had passed away earlier that week. The bed was stripped bare, the floor freshly mopped. I turned the light switch off and stepped back into the hall, but as I started to walk away, the light came back on behind me. It clicked faintly in that automatic way, like something had moved. I told myself it was just the sensor glitch Lydia mentioned. Still, as I walked away, I glanced back once, and I swear I saw a shadow move across the far wall inside that empty room. By 1:30, the halls were so quiet that every noise made me jump. I was refilling the water pitcher at the end of the hall when I heard soft footsteps, slow, dragging ones, somewhere behind me. They stopped when I turned around. The hallway was empty. I waited, holding my breath, but all I heard was the faint hum of the vents. I set the pitcher down, adjusted my flashlight, and walked slowly back down the hall. As I passed room 210, I heard it again, that soft, dragging sound, followed by a muffled voice. It sounded like someone whispering. I stepped closer, pressing my ear to the door. Mrs. Ellis was supposed to be asleep. The whispering continued, though I couldn't make out words, just that soft, steady cadence, like someone speaking low to avoid being overheard. Then, from the other side of the door, a low, croaking laugh. I pushed the door open. The room was dark except for the glow of the nightlight near the bed. Mrs. Ellis was lying there, her thin white hair fanned across the pillow. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. "Mrs. Ellis?" I said quietly, stepping closer. She turned her head toward me slowly, her lips moving soundlessly. "Are you okay?" Her eyes flicked toward the corner of the room, toward the closet. I followed her gaze. The closet door was open just a crack, and from the darkness inside, I swear I heard the faintest whisper. I pulled the door open all the way. Nothing was there, just folded sheets and gowns hanging neatly. When I turned back around, Mrs. Ellis had shut her eyes. Her breathing was shallow but steady. I left the room, heart pounding, and tried to shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been whispering in that closet. The rest of the night was worse. At 2:10, the lights in the north hallway began flickering again, one by one, as if someone was walking past each motion sensor. But the security feed showed nothing, just the lights flashing on and off down the corridor like footsteps made of light. Around 3 a.m., Lydia radioed me from downstairs. "Hey, could you check the supply closet near room 207? The motion alarm triggered down there." I told her I'd just been there an hour ago, but she sounded uneasy. "Just check, please." I walked back toward that end of the hall. The light over 207 was still flickering. The air felt colder, too, like a draft had swept through even though all the windows were sealed. When I opened the supply closet, the smell hit me first. That cold, metallic tang of something rotting faintly beneath disinfectant. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the shelves. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. There was a footprint on the floor, a bare footprint, small, faintly wet, leading from the doorway into the corner of the room. I followed it slowly until it stopped right at the wall. No return prints, no sign of anyone, just one set leading inward and ending at solid wall. That's when I heard the breathing, soft, raspy, coming from behind the wall itself. I backed out of the room and shut the door, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I radioed Lydia again, but the line was dead. Just static. I hurried to the nurse's station to use the landline. But when I got there, the hallway behind me went completely dark, every single light. And from the blackness, that slow, dragging footstep came again. One step, then another. It was coming closer, and I could feel the air growing colder, the smell getting stronger, that metallic, damp smell that reminded me of old blood. I shined my flashlight down the hall, and for a split second, I saw someone standing at the far end. It was Henry Cole, the man from room 207. He was barefoot, wearing the same hospital gown he'd died in, head tilted slightly to one side. His eyes were sunken, his skin gray and waxy. He lifted one arm slowly and pointed directly at me. The light flickered and went out. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, slamming the door behind me. I tried the radio again, still nothing but static. I decided to take the stairs to the first floor and find Lydia. The stairwell was freezing, and each echoing footstep felt like it wasn't just a mine. Halfway down, I heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. It said my name. The voice was low, hoarse but familiar. I turned, shining my light up the stairs, and saw someone crouched just above the landing. It was moving slowly down toward me, its head lolling from side to side like it couldn't keep its balance. The beam hit its face, and I dropped the flashlight. It wasn't a person. Its eyes were gone, just black hollows, and its mouth hung open, twitching like it was trying to speak. Its skin looked half-burned, blistered, and in its hand it clutched a patient wristband. It kept whispering my name as it descended the stairs. I bolted. When I reached the main floor, I sprinted straight to the nurse's station. Lydia was there, staring at the monitors. Her face was pale. "Did you see?" I started, but she cut me off. "Look." She pointed to the screen showing the north hallway. Every door on that floor, every single one, was open. And in the middle of the hallway stood a group of people in hospital gowns, all barefoot, all staring directly into the camera. Their faces were gray, blurred, but one of them, the tallest, had a deep burn mark running across its face. The screen went black. I called 911 right then. The police came around 4:30. By the time they arrived, the hallway was empty again. They found no footprints, no open doors, nothing on the cameras except static. I quit that night. I never went back. Lydia lasted a few more months before transferring. She told me later that the room numbers 207 and 2110 had both been sealed shut. Maintenance said they had electrical issues, but a year later, the building closed altogether. One of the construction workers who helped strip it out said they found dozens of old patient files in the basement. Names of residents who died there, some from as far back as the 1970s. Henry Cole's name was the last one on the list. Sometimes, when I'm driving home late from work, I'll see the shape of a figure standing in the road ahead, tall, gray, barefoot, just for a moment before it disappears into the dark. And I can still hear that whisper, low and rasping, saying my name. Story the end. It was a Tuesday night when I started my shift at the Midwest manufacturing plant, the kind of place that hummed with fluorescent lights and the faint smell of machine oil. I had been working nights for a little over 6 months at that point, and although I'd had my share of weird occurrences, the usual creaks, the feeling of someone walking past when no one was there, I had never experienced anything that made my skin crawl like what happened that night. I had just clocked in around 11:30 p.m., and the place was empty except for the skeleton crew. Me, a couple of line supervisors, and our security guard, a guy named Carl who had worked there for over 20 years. Carl was old school, gruff, and unnervingly perceptive. I liked him, but I also didn't like him knowing so much about me. The first few hours were normal enough. I went through the nightly inspections, checking machines, ensuring safety protocols were followed, and logging everything into the system. Around 1:15 a.m., I noticed something off in the east wing of the plant. There's a storage area down a narrow corridor that was always dark, even though some lights flickered on when you walked in. I thought I saw movement, just out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, no one was there. I shrugged it off, assuming it was fatigue or my imagination. By 2 a.m., the other employees had taken their breaks, leaving me alone on the main floor. The plant was massive, echoing every sound. The quiet was oppressive, almost palpable. I was folding my reports when I heard a metallic scraping sound coming from the storage area. Not a machine. I was certain of that, but something dragging. My heart started racing, and I told myself it was probably a pallet jack left half open or some scrap metal shifting. I wasn't convinced, but I tried to focus on my work. At 2:30 a.m., I heard Carl's radio crackle. He was on the other end, checking the perimeter. "You seeing anything over there?" he asked, voice low. I replied, "Nothing, just the usual." But I lied. I didn't want to seem paranoid. He chuckled softly. "All right, just keep your eyes open." That "keep your eyes open" line stuck with me for the rest of the night. Around 3 a.m., the feeling in the plant shifted. The usual mechanical hum seemed to dip and swell, almost like the building itself was breathing. I was alone now. Everyone else was on break or gone for maintenance checks. I felt it, a presence, heavy like the air around me had weight. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on exhaustion, but then I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible footsteps coming from the east wing. Slow, deliberate, like someone was stalking the length of the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly made my way toward the sound. The hallway stretched for what felt like forever. Each step I took echoed in the silence. I reached the storage area, flashlight sweeping across the shelves stacked with boxes, tools, and random machinery. Nothing, not a person, not a sign of movement. And then I heard it, whispering. Low, guttural, barely audible, coming from behind the shelves. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to leave. My throat tightened. Hello? I called out, trying to make my voice steady. The whispering stopped. Silence. Then a single metallic thud echoed from the far end of the hallway. My pulse skyrocketed. I shined the flashlight toward the noise. Nothing. I stepped forward and the floor beneath me creaked in protest. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving against the wall. Not a normal shadow, something wrong, twisted, too tall, impossibly thin, like it was leaning on angles that shouldn't exist. I blinked. It was gone. I ran. Not in a panicked sprint, but a controlled, urgent pace back to the main floor. I grabbed my phone to call Carl, but no signal. I reached the security office. Empty. The radio wasn't responding. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I considered just leaving, but the plant had strict policies. Leaving without permission would get me fired immediately, and night shifts in that area were considered dangerous if you were alone. I couldn't. Around 3:45 a.m., I tried to shake off what I had seen. Maybe it was a trick of the light, my mind playing games in the dark. But then I noticed the monitors in the security office were flickering. Cameras that were supposed to show empty halls showed movement, indistinct figures darting just out of frame. I watched one camera in particular for what felt like 10 minutes. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, hunched, moving in a jerky, unnatural rhythm. I pressed a button to switch cameras, but the image froze, the figure still visible. I felt sweat running down my back. I didn't hear Carl come in, but I sensed him behind me. Everything all right? His voice was calm, but I could tell he noticed my pallor. I turned, and he was there. Relief and fear collided. I pointed at the monitors, but when he looked, nothing was on them. Probably a glitch, he said casually, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what I felt. By 4:15 a.m., I tried to focus on routine maintenance to keep myself sane. The plant had these conveyor belts and presses, some running automatically even at night. I checked one of the belts in the west wing and noticed a box that wasn't there before. Inside, a single rusted tool. Not unusual in a plant, except it was covered in a thick, dark substance that looked almost like dried blood. My stomach turned. I dropped it. Carl, who had followed me, looked at it and shrugged. Probably from the scrap pile. Old metal gets weird sometimes. But it wasn't from the scrap pile. I knew that. I'd been in that area hundreds of times. That box wasn't there before. That tool wasn't there before. By 5 a.m., I was hyper aware of every sound. The plant had a series of emergency doors and maintenance tunnels. I had to pass through one tunnel to get back to the break room. The lights were dim, flickering intermittently. I started down the tunnel and felt a presence again. Cold, heavy, like the air itself was pressing against me. Halfway through, I heard a low growl, not from any machine or animal, but something sentient, something aware of me. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand, and then I saw it. Not a shadow, not a reflection. A figure crouched at the far end of the tunnel, impossibly thin, skin pale and glistening, eyes black as pits, staring directly at me. Its limbs were long, spindly, and it moved with a jerky, unnatural grace. I swear it smiled, or at least what passed for a mouth in that shape of a face twisted upwards. It hissed my name. My name. I ran. Through the tunnel, up the stairwell, through the main floor, adrenaline propelling me faster than I ever thought possible. I didn't stop until I burst into the security office. Carl was there, calmly sipping coffee. "You okay?" he asked. I gasped out what I had seen, pointing toward the tunnel, but when we looked back, nothing was there. Carl leaned back in his chair. "I've seen things like that before," he said quietly. "But I don't talk about it. It only comes for certain people. You saw it because you were alone, and it noticed you." "Noticed me?" I asked, voice shaking. "Yeah," he said. "Some things don't belong here, but they slip through. They watch. They wait. You've been working nights long enough. You should have known." I didn't sleep the rest of my shift. Every creak, every hum of the machines, every shadow made my heart stop. By the time dawn rolled around, I was a wreck. I went home, slept for a few hours, and tried to convince myself it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night after that, I saw the same figure in my dreams, crouched, pale, black-eyed, whispering my name. Some nights it was closer, some nights further away, but it always watched. The smell of machine oil in my dreams turned to the stench of decay, and I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that I was being observed. I started calling in sick more often. People asked why, but I lied, citing exhaustion. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. But the plant had changed. I could feel it in the air, even during the day. Shadows seemed deeper, corners darker. On one occasion, I saw something in the parking lot. Just for a second, a tall, thin figure standing behind a row of trucks, motionless, staring at me before vanishing. I eventually quit that job, unable to handle the fear. But I know it followed me. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving or working alone, I see movement just out of the corner of my eye or hear my name whispered in the darkness. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to. All I know is that once it notices you, it doesn't let go. A few months later, I heard from a friend still working at the plant that another night shift worker disappeared. Security footage showed him walking toward the east wing alone. He never came out. They never found him. Carl said it happens sometimes. Some things in the plant aren't human, and they aren't bound by reality the way we are. They watch, they wait, and sometimes they take. I haven't worked a night shift since, and I don't plan to. The thought of being alone in the dark with that thing, it still keeps me awake. Even now I feel it, lingering just out of sight, patient, watching, whispering. It's real. I know it's real, and I know it's still waiting for someone else to notice. I never told anyone the full story. People would call me crazy, but I can't unsee what I saw. I can't unhear it calling my name. And I know if I ever went back, it would still be there, crouched in the shadows, waiting for the next person, alone on the night shift. Even writing this, I feel it behind me, watching, waiting, always waiting. Story the end. It was just after 10:30 p.m. when I arrived at Hollow Creek Diner, a small roadside restaurant tucked along Highway 67 in rural Tennessee. I had taken the night shift because it paid extra, and honestly, it was supposed to be quiet work. Most nights consisted of refilling coffee, wiping counters, and occasionally taking orders from late-night travelers or truckers passing through. I had worked there for almost a year, so I knew the routine, but that night felt off from the moment I stepped through the door. The air outside was thick with fog rolling down from the hills. The neon open sign flickered in uneven bursts as I parked my car. When I opened the diner's door, a bell jingled weakly overhead. Inside, the smell was a mix of old grease, coffee, and disinfectant. The usual hum of the fridge and ovens was louder than usual, or maybe I was just noticing it more. I flipped the lights on in the dining area, checked the cash register, and walked toward the back office where the security monitors were set up. Most of the cameras were installed after a string of robberies a few years back. The monitors showed the dining area, kitchen, parking lot, and the narrow hallway that led to the storage rooms and basement. I flipped through the feeds, noting that the parking lot was empty, except for a lone white van parked near the edge, its headlights off. By 11 p.m., the diner was completely empty. I decided to do my first routine check. I walked the perimeter, checking tables, the kitchen, and the storage area. When I reached the basement door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it earlier. A shiver ran down my spine as I reached for the handle. The door was cold, and the air seeping through carried a faint metallic odor, like blood. Probably maintenance, I muttered, though the crew had left hours ago. I closed it and locked it tightly, making a mental note to tell the manager. I returned to the office and sat down, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. Around 12:15 a.m., I noticed movement on the camera covering the hallway to the storage rooms. A figure was standing at the far end, motionless, partially hidden by the shadows. I adjusted the brightness. It was tall, thin, wearing something long, like a coat or an apron, but the movements were subtle, almost imperceptible. Then the figure bent its head at a sharp angle, tilting it in a way that didn't look natural. My stomach turned. I reached for the radio. Hey, Marla, anyone supposed to be in the storage hall? Silence. Then her voice came back, strained. Not that I know of. Why? I... I see someone on the camera, standing at the end of the hall. There was a pause. You sure you're not seeing things? I'm positive, I said. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. The hallway was dim, lit only by a few flickering bulbs. The air was damp and cold, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones. I called out, my voice echoing, "Hello, security here. Please identify yourself." No response. I reached the end of the hall. Nothing. The storage rooms were all locked. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I must have imagined it. When I turned to leave, I froze. One of the storage room doors, always kept closed, was slightly open, just a crack. I didn't recall opening it. The faint smell of iron grew stronger. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight inside. The room was empty, except for shelves stacked with canned goods and old equipment. Then I saw it, a handprint smeared on one of the shelves, wet and dark. Not small. Large, like someone towering over me had pressed their hand there. I stumbled back. The door slammed shut on its own. My heart raced. I radioed Marla again, voice shaking. Something's down here. The storage door, it just slammed. She gasped. Nate, get out of there. I turned, flashlight shaking, and saw the figure. It had emerged from the shadows at the back of the room, tall and thin, head tilted unnaturally. Its eyes were black, hollow, reflecting the faint light of my flashlight. I froze. It didn't move toward me, but the air around it seemed heavy, pressing down. I could hear faint scratching noises from somewhere behind it. Suddenly it disappeared. I ran upstairs and slammed the office door. My hands were trembling as I tried to control my breathing. The monitors flickered, static filling the screens. Then the figure appeared on multiple feeds at once, the dining area, the parking lot, even inside the kitchen, all of them staring directly at me. I grabbed the phone to call the manager, but the line was dead. The overhead lights flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. The scratching started again, coming from all directions. It was soft at first, then louder, more insistent, circling the office. My flashlight flickered back on. The figure was standing right behind the desk, head cocked at the same unnatural angle. Its skin was gray, almost translucent, and its arms hung loosely at its sides. I bolted out the back office door, slamming it shut behind me, and ran toward the parking lot. My car was there, but the white van was gone. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The diner's lights flickered one last time, and in the darkness of the windows, I thought I saw it standing there, watching. I quit the diner the next day. I've never gone back to night shifts. But sometimes when I drive late at night along country roads, I see small diners with empty parking lots, and I swear I can feel those hollow eyes staring through the windows. Story the end. It was early spring when I started working the night shift at Ridgeview Care Center, a small assisted living facility on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decently, and after a long stretch of unemployment, I was in no position to be picky. The building itself was old, converted from what used to be an elementary school decades earlier. It had long, narrow hallways, flickering lights, and that faint smell of disinfectant that never really went away. There were usually two of us on duty overnight, me and an older nurse named Sharon, but on my third week, she called in sick, leaving me alone for the shift. "Don't worry," she told me over the phone. "Those old folks sleep like rocks. You'll barely have anything to do." That turned out to be only half true. By midnight, the building was quiet. The soft whir of oxygen machines filled the halls, mixed with the occasional cough or groan from behind a closed door. I was doing paperwork at the nurse's station when I noticed something strange on the security monitor. One of the cameras, hallway 3 near room 12, showed movement. It wasn't clear at first, just a shape flickering at the edge of the frame. The residents weren't allowed to roam the halls at night, but sometimes one of them got confused and wandered. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the corridor. The hall was dim, lit only by a few buzzing fluorescent bulbs. Room 12 was near the end. I walked quietly, listening for footsteps or the squeak of slippers on tile. Nothing. When I reached the room, I found the door wide open. The bed was empty. "Mrs. Cairns?" I whispered. No answer. I checked the bathroom, the closet, empty. But when I turned to leave, I froze. On the bed, the sheets were folded neatly back, like someone had just climbed out of them a second ago, and on the pillow there was a small wet handprint. I stared at it, confused. It wasn't possible. Mrs. Kearns was frail, bedridden, and on oxygen. She could barely lift her arms, let alone wander the halls. Still, I went to check the other rooms, thinking maybe someone else was up, but every door was closed, every patient asleep. When I got back to the nurse's station, the monitor for hallway 3 was still showing static. I adjusted the dial, and for a split second, I saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway. A figure, tall, head slightly tilted, staring directly at the camera. Then the screen went black. I felt the air grow colder, the kind of cold that doesn't make sense indoors. The overhead light above me flickered once, twice, and then steadied. I tried to shake it off. Old buildings, I told myself. Bad wiring, weird camera feeds, nothing new. But as I went back to my rounds, the quiet felt different now, heavier, like the air itself was pressing against me. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard the whispering. It came from the intercom system, just a faint static at first, then a voice, low and distorted. I couldn't make out the words, but it was coming from the wing near the old classrooms, the part of the building they hadn't converted. That section had been sealed off years ago. No residents, no staff, nothing but storage rooms and broken desks behind those locked doors. The voice grew louder, clearer. It was saying something over and over, slow and deliberate. Come downstairs. I turned the volume knob down, but the voice didn't stop. Come downstairs. My pulse quickened. The facility didn't have a downstairs, at least not that anyone used. There was a basement beneath the west wing, but it was locked and off limits, storage for old records and equipment. I'd never even seen it. Still, the voice kept calling. Come downstairs. Finally, I couldn't take it. I grabbed the keys and made my way toward the west wing. The air grew colder with each step. My flashlight flickered, the beam weak and shaky. When I reached the locked door, I hesitated. The whispering was louder now, clear and close, like someone was standing right on the other side. Come downstairs. I unlocked the door. The smell hit me first, mildew, damp concrete, and something else. Something like rust. The stairwell was narrow and steep, lit only by a single bulb that buzzed weakly overhead. I descended slowly, each creak of the steps echoing through the silence. At the bottom was a long corridor lined with old lockers and a few storage rooms. The air was thick and heavy, and the deeper I went, the stronger that metallic scent became. I reached a heavy door marked Records Room. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was filled with old file cabinets and cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. My flashlight beam swept across yellowed papers and broken chairs. Then I saw something in the corner, a figure crouched on the floor. Hello, I said, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, and the smell of rot hit me so hard I gagged. I raised my light, and my stomach dropped. It was Mrs. Kearns, or what looked like her. She was sitting upright, head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes wide open, staring at the wall. Her hospital gown was soaked, her skin gray and shriveled. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. But then she moved. Her head turned toward me, slowly, with a faint cracking sound. I told you, she whispered, her voice raspy and wet. Come downstairs. I screamed and ran. I don't remember how I made it up the stairs or how I locked the door behind me. When I looked at the monitors again, every camera was filled with static. The intercom was silent. When the morning staff arrived, I was still sitting at the nurse's station, shaking, unable to speak. They called the police, but by the time anyone checked the basement, it was empty. No body, no smell, no sign of anything. The old door had been sealed shut from the inside. I quit that day. I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion had played tricks on me. But a week later, I got a call from Sharon. She sounded nervous. Did you ever go down to the basement while you were there? She asked. I didn't answer. They said a pipe burst down there. The maintenance guys found something while cleaning. Old medical charts, and she paused. A file on a patient named Margaret Kearns. Date of death, 1983, 40 years ago. I hung up without saying a word. That night I woke up to the sound of my intercom crackling, the baby monitor I used for my niece, who was asleep in the next room. At first I thought it was just static. Then I heard it, faint and familiar. Come downstairs. I unplugged it and threw it in the trash, but the whisper didn't stop. Now every night, sometime around 1:30, I hear the same voice, sometimes through the vents, sometimes just outside my bedroom door. Always the same words. Come downstairs. I moved 3 states away, got a new job, but last week when I came home late, I found muddy footprints on my basement steps, small, thin, and bare. I don't go down there anymore. Story. The end. It was 11:17 p.m. when I clocked in at the gas station off Route 92, a lonely stretch of road about 30 miles outside of Franklin, Kentucky. The place was small, just 2 pumps, a single aisle of snacks, a coffee machine that hadn't been cleaned properly in weeks, and a little security office in the back where I'd spend most of the night watching the cameras. It was the kind of job nobody wanted, but everyone took at least once in their life. The pay was bad, the hours worse, and the isolation made it feel like you were slowly fading out of the world. Still, I didn't mind it. Nights were quiet, and all I really had to do was restock the drinks, mop up spills, and keep an eye on the register. Most nights, I'd get a couple of truckers stopping in for coffee, maybe a few late-night drivers looking to gas up and disappear back into the dark. That night, though, something felt off from the start. The wind had picked up earlier in the evening, and the security lights outside kept flickering in a strange rhythm. When I unlocked the door, the bell above it gave that tired metallic jingle that echoed too loudly for such a small space. The air inside smelled faintly like gasoline and burnt coffee. I started the shift like I always did, checked the cash drawer, set the coffee pot, and glanced at the camera feeds. Everything looked fine. The road was empty except for a single 18-wheeler parked across the street, its headlights off, cab dark. By midnight, I'd had maybe 3 customers, 2 truckers, and a woman who came in for cigarettes and didn't say a word. I was standing behind the counter, flipping through the old logbook when I noticed movement on the monitor. One of the cameras outside, pointing toward the pumps, caught something. At first, I thought it was just static. The feed shimmered like heat waves on asphalt. But as I leaned closer, I saw a shape forming at the edge of the light. It was a figure standing just beyond the pumps where the light barely reached. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure didn't move, just stood there facing the store. I tapped the monitor a couple of times. The image didn't change. Probably a drunk, I muttered. Still, something about it didn't sit right. I picked up the phone, ready to call the county sheriff's line if it lingered, but when I looked back at the screen, the figure was gone. I stepped to the window and looked out. Nothing. The lot was empty. The truck across the street still dark. For the next hour, everything went quiet again. No cars, no wind, just that hum from the overhead lights. I was restocking chips when the front doorbell jingled softly. I turned, expecting a customer. No one was there. The air inside felt colder suddenly. I checked the camera feed again, rewinding the footage from the last minute. The door had opened on its own. Just as I paused the footage, the screen flickered again. Static rolled across for several seconds, then cleared. The pumps were visible, and so was the figure, closer this time. It stood between the 2 pumps, motionless, face hidden by the shadows. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I reached under the counter for the small aluminum baseball bat we kept for emergencies, and stepped around the counter. The air outside hit me like ice. The lights above the pumps buzzed loudly, one of them flickering every few seconds. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded too small in the open space. No answer. The figure wasn't there. I took a few steps forward, flashlight in one hand, bat in the other. The sound of my boots crunching on the gravel seemed deafening. I swept the beam around the lot, across the pumps, the dumpster, the tree line. Nothing. Then I heard it, faint but clear. A tapping sound coming from the side of the building. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. I walked slowly toward the noise. The tapping stopped when I reached the corner. I shined the light against the side wall. Nothing. That's when I realized I could see faint handprints on the glass of the front window. Long, streaky smudges running down the surface like someone had dragged their fingers across it. I backed away, every nerve screaming at me to get inside. When I stepped back into the store, the phone rang. The sound nearly made me drop the flashlight. I answered. "Route 92 gas. This is Nate." Static. Then a voice, low and strained, came through the line. "Don't. Look at it." "What?" Click. The line went dead. My mouth went dry. I checked the caller ID. No number. Just unknown. I locked the door and stood there, breathing hard. My reflection in the glass looked pale, sickly under the buzzing light. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a trucker was screwing with me. Around 2 a.m., the cameras glitched again. The feed to the front lot went black for about 10 seconds, then came back. The figure was right outside the door now, pressed against the glass, staring in. Its head was tilted downward at a strange angle, and its arms hung limply at its sides. It wasn't a person, not anymore. The face was gray, features blurred like wax melting in the heat. I froze, unable to move. Then the power went out. Everything went dark. The lights, the hum of the coolers, the heater. Only the faint glow of the emergency exit sign lit the room. The silence was suffocating. I backed up behind the counter, gripping the bat with both hands, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I waited, listening. The door handle started to rattle. I gasped and turned the flashlight on. The beam hit the front door. It was shaking in its frame, the glass vibrating. Then it stopped. When I took a hesitant step forward, I saw something scrawled across the glass from the outside. Words written what looked like dirty streaks or grease. "Let me in." That broke me. I ran to the back office, slammed the door, and pushed the desk against it. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the flashlight twice. I grabbed the phone, but it was dead. Outside, I could hear the sound again, not tapping this time, scratching, long, slow scratches against the metal of the back door. Then a voice, soft, almost pleading. "Please. It's so cold out here." It was a woman's voice, familiar. I hesitated. My throat tightened. "Who's there?" I whispered. The voice came again, closer to the door now. "Please, I just need to come inside. You left the light on for me." I knew that voice. It sounded exactly like my sister, Julia. She died 3 years ago in a car crash. My vision blurred. I pressed my hand against my face. "You're not real," I whispered. But the voice came again, soft, trembling. "Nate. Nate, please open the door." I started crying, shaking my head. "You're not her. You can't be." The handle turned once, twice. Then silence. I didn't move for what felt like hours. When the power finally flickered back on, the clock read 4:57 a.m. The scratching had stopped. I pushed the desk away from the door and stepped out cautiously. Everything looked normal again. The lights, the shelves, even the pumps outside were still. But on the floor near the back door there were footprints. Bare, wet footprints leading from the door to the middle of the room. Then they stopped. I quit the next day. A week later, one of the morning clerks, Sam, called me. He said he'd started working the same shift I used to have. "Nate," he said, voice shaking, "someone keeps calling the store phone at night. They just whisper your name over and over." I hung up and never went back. Sometimes, when I drive past Route 92 late at night, I swear I still see that gas station lit up in the dark, one pump flickering, and a tall figure standing just beyond the light, waiting. Story the end. It was late October when I started working nights at the small-town 911 dispatch center. I'd worked day shifts before, but the night schedule paid better, and the idea of a quiet, empty building appealed to me. Most nights were calm, just the occasional drunk driver, noise complaint, or lost pet. After midnight, the phone barely rang at all. My supervisor, a woman named Patty, usually stayed until 10 p.m., leaving me alone for the rest of the shift. It was a small operation, 2 rooms, a few computers, a bank of radios, and a wall of monitors that displayed the status of every emergency vehicle in the county. The building sat on the edge of town, surrounded by fields and a long, empty highway that stretched into darkness. The quiet was almost peaceful until the night that changed everything. It was a little after 2:30 a.m. when the first call came in. The line crackled, and I heard breathing. Uneven, shaky. 911, what's your emergency? No answer, just the faint sound of wind. Hello? Can you hear me? Then in a whisper so soft I could barely make it out, a voice said, "He's in the house." I sat up straight, heart pounding. "Who's in the house? Are you in danger?" The line went dead. I immediately pulled up the call log. The number came from a landline out near County Road 7, a rural area with maybe 4 or 5 homes scattered miles apart. I tried calling back, but no one answered. Standard protocol said I had to dispatch a deputy for a welfare check, so I radioed it in. Deputy Miller responded. "On my way," he said, his voice calm and steady as always. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the radio crackled. "Dispatch, I'm at the residence. Lights are on, doors open. Looks like," his voice cut out. "Repeat that." I said. Static, then faintly. Dispatch, there's no one here. What do you mean, no one? The house is empty, no sign of struggle, but... He trailed off. But what? A pause. There's a phone off the hook in the living room, still warm to the touch. Then his radio went silent again. I tried to reach him several more times, but he didn't respond. 20 minutes later, he called back, voice shaky. I'm heading back. You're not going to believe this. When he got in, he looked pale. He told me he'd checked every inch of that house, bedrooms, basement, attic. Nothing. But as he was leaving, he found a set of muddy footprints leading from the backyard into the living room. Bare footprints, small ones. Like a child's? I asked. He nodded. But they stopped in the middle of the floor. Just stopped. He didn't stick around after that, said he was heading home early. I stayed until 6 a.m., unable to shake the unease. The next night, it happened again. Same time. 2:30 a.m., same faint breathing, same whisper. He's in the house. My stomach dropped. I checked the call log. It was the same number, the one from County Road 7. This time, I didn't call Miller. I called the sheriff directly. He told me that house had been abandoned for nearly 15 years. The last people to live there were the Turner family, a husband, wife, and their little girl. In 2008, all three vanished one night. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no bodies. Just their phone off the hook, and a trail of small muddy footprints leading from the back door to the living room. After that, no one wanted to buy the property. It just sat there, slowly decaying. That's when I realized the call shouldn't have been possible. Landline service had been cut off years ago. Still, the calls kept coming. Every night, always around 2:30, always the same whisper. I started recording them. Most of the time it was static and wind, but sometimes I heard something else, a faint dragging sound, and beneath it what sounded like a low hum. I started having trouble sleeping. Even when I wasn't at work, I'd wake up to the sound of ringing. No caller ID, no message, just dead air and breathing. One night, after a week of this, I finally answered one of those after-hours calls. Hello? Silence. He's in your house. Then, he's in your house. I was alone in the dispatch building. The doors were locked. The cameras showed nothing unusual. But then the motion detector in the hallway went off. Just a faint beep from the security panel, followed by the image flickering on the monitor. There was movement. A shape, walking slowly past the door. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. This is dispatch? Any unit near the station? No response. The footsteps were faint but clear. Not heavy boots. Not adult. Light. Bare. Like the sound of wet feet on tile. I turned the flashlight toward the hallway. The beam cut through the dark and landed on a small, wet footprint near the vending machine. Then another. And another. They led toward the back storage room. Every part of me screamed to stay behind the desk, but some awful curiosity, pushed me forward. I followed the prints. The air grew colder with every step. I reached the storage room door, hand trembling as I turned the knob. It opened easily. The light inside was off, but I could hear it, the faint sound of breathing. I raised the flashlight, and for a second I thought the beam was catching on dust or smoke. Then I realized what I was seeing. A figure crouched in the corner, small, head bowed. "Hey," I whispered, "are you hurt?" The figure didn't move. I took a cautious step closer, and then it stood up. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, wearing a soaked nightgown that clung to her small frame. Her hair hung over her face, dripping onto the floor. I could see the water pooling around her bare feet. She lifted her head, and I saw her eyes, dark, hollow, and wrong. Then she smiled. "Can you call my mommy?" she said, her voice echoing like it was coming from somewhere far away. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. My flashlight flickered. When it steadied again, she was gone. The puddle remained. I ran back to the control room and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called the sheriff, told him what happened. He said he'd send a unit right away. When they arrived 20 minutes later, I was still shaking. They searched every inch of the building. Nothing. No footprints. No puddle. The storage room was dry. The sheriff tried to reassure me, but I saw it in his face. He didn't believe me. He told me to take a few nights off. I did, but when I got home, my landline rang. The caller ID was blank. When I answered, I heard it again. The sound of wind, faint breathing, and then that same whisper. "He's in the house." The line went dead. I unplugged every phone, threw my work cell in a drawer, and tried to convince myself it wasn't real. But every night since then, at 2:30 a.m., I wake up to the same sound, faint footsteps somewhere in my house, moving slowly from room to room. Sometimes I hear a door creak open. Sometimes I hear soft breathing right outside my bedroom. And once, I woke up to wet footprints on my carpet, small, bare, leading from the hallway to the side of my bed. I don't work at the dispatch center anymore. I moved 2 towns over into an apartment on the 3rd floor. I don't even have a landline now. But a few nights ago, around 2:30, I got a call from an unknown number on my new phone. When I answered, the line was quiet at first. Then came the whisper. "He's in the house." And just before it went dead, I heard something new, something low and distant, a child's laugh. Story the end. It was around midnight when I walked into the fluorescent lit halls of St. Mary's General Hospital, a place I had worked at for nearly 3 years. I had picked up the night shift again because the extra pay was tempting, and honestly, I liked the quiet that came with most of the hospital being asleep. The night shift had its rhythm, the hum of the HVAC, the occasional clatter of a tray, the low murmur of monitors, and the intermittent beeping from the ICU. But that night, the rhythm felt off. I started my rounds like any other night, checking on patients, documenting vitals, and making sure that everything was in order. At around 1:30 a.m., I noticed something strange in room 214. The patient, a middle-aged man who had been admitted for complications from diabetes, was supposed to be asleep, but the bed was empty. At first, I thought he'd gotten up to use the restroom, which was common, especially for patients with IV lines. They often had a nurse help them to the bathroom. But as I glanced around, I saw no one. The hallway outside was empty, and the door to the restroom at the end of the hall was shut. I called out softly, "Mr. Daniels, are you okay?" No response. I moved closer to the door of room 214 and gently pushed it open. That's when I saw him, or rather I saw something. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets tucked in tightly, like he had never been there at all. No signs of him leaving, no chair tipped over, no IV line dragged across the floor. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I felt my stomach tighten. I had been on night shifts long enough to know that things could go wrong, patients wandering off, confusion, hallucinations. But this was different. I called security. Within 5 minutes, 2 guards arrived, flashlights cutting through the dim hallways. We searched the whole floor, checking closets, bathrooms, supply rooms, everywhere a patient could possibly hide. Nothing. Mr. Daniels was gone. The hospital administration didn't like reports like this. They told me patients sometimes get disoriented. He'll be back in the morning. But no one could explain the security footage, or rather, the lack of it. The cameras in that hallway had captured a static-filled screen from around 1:28 a.m. to 1:34 a.m., just when Mr. Daniels disappeared. When the feed returned, the bed was empty, as if he had never been there. I tried to shake it off and continued my rounds, but the sense of unease stayed with me. By 2:15 a.m., I was in the ICU, checking on a woman recovering from a stroke. She was awake and coherent, which was rare, and she stared at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Do you see them?" she whispered. "See who?" I asked, leaning closer. "The shadows. They come when it's quiet. They take people." I froze. I had heard patients talk nonsense like this before. Delirium, medications, fear. But there was something in her tone, the way her eyes darted to the corner of the room, that made me feel real terror. I looked where she was looking and for a brief second, thought I saw a dark figure standing by the far wall. I blinked, and it was gone. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, the hospital's fluorescent lights playing tricks, the isolation of the night shift warping my mind. But later that night, around 3 a.m., I was in the supply room restocking IV bags when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, walking down the hallway outside, except the hall was empty. I opened the door, expecting to see someone, maybe another nurse, maybe a janitor. Nothing. The thing that really got to me happened around 3:45 a.m. I was in the cafeteria grabbing a cup of coffee, just trying to keep awake. The lights flickered for a second, and when they stabilized, I noticed someone standing by the vending machines. I froze because the figure was pale, thin, and completely still, staring straight at me. I blinked, and it was gone. No one entered or left the cafeteria. I asked the security monitors. They showed an empty room, the timestamp perfectly normal, no footage of anyone standing there. At this point, my anxiety had spiked. My coworkers on the day shift had always joked about the things that come alive at night, but I had never believed them. Now I was starting to. By 4:30 a.m., I was on my last round before checking the vitals on the patients in the maternity ward. That's when it happened. I was walking past room 310, where a woman had just given birth to twins, when I heard it. Crying, not of babies, but of something deeper, almost guttural. I froze. The babies were asleep. Their mother was resting. I looked around. The sounds seemed to come from inside the room. I stepped inside, trying to calm myself, expecting maybe a leaking monitor or a sound echoing from another ward. The crying stopped the second I entered. The room was empty, except for the mother and her sleeping newborns. But then I noticed something chilling. The crib in the corner, the one in which the twins slept, had small handprints pressed into the railing, wet, as if someone or something had tried to climb in. I quickly left the room, my hands shaking, and headed for the nurse's station. I tried to call security again, but the line was dead. No dial tone, nothing. The backup line in the hall also dead. And then I heard it, whispering. Faint, distant, but unmistakably human. My name. Kelly. Kelly. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I wasn't supposed to hear it, not really, but I did. And the voice wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. My heart was pounding, my pulse racing, and I suddenly wanted to leave, run out into the night, far away from the hospital. But I couldn't. I had patients depending on me, and I couldn't abandon them. I grabbed my flashlight and started moving faster, heading to the stairwell for a break. That's when I saw it again. A figure in the corner of the stairwell, just at the edge of my flashlight's beam. Tall, faceless, blacker than the shadows around it. It didn't move toward me, but I felt its attention like it was studying me, waiting for something. I shouted, "Hey!" Nothing. I swung my flashlight, it disappeared. The rest of the night was a blur. The whispering came and went, the footsteps echoed in empty hallways, and shadows seemed to move against the flow of light. Patients reported hearing strange noises, seeing fleeting figures, things that vanished when anyone else entered the room. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. I reported everything to the night shift supervisor, but she dismissed it as stress, lack of sleep, and imagination. Night shift does things to people, she said. But I knew better. Something was wrong at St. Mary's, and it wasn't just me. Weeks later, the hospital had another mysterious disappearance. A janitor vanished while cleaning the basement, leaving only his mop and bucket behind. No footage, no trace. Security didn't understand. The police were baffled. Staff whispered about the night shift, about shadows that moved, and whispers in the hallways. Some quit without explanation. I stopped working nights after that. But even during the day, I sometimes see something out of the corner of my eye. A dark figure slipping into a hallway. A fleeting shadow. A whisper I can't place. I don't know what it is, but I know it waits in the quiet, patient, unseen until the night shift returns. Every time I pass St. Mary's General Hospital, I feel the weight of that unseen presence. And every time I hear a hospital monitor beep or footsteps echoing in an empty hall, I remember the things I saw and heard that night. The hospital never explained what happened, and I doubt anyone ever will. I sometimes wonder if Mr. Daniels was the first of many, if the shadows take people when no one is looking. If the faceless figure I saw is still waiting for the next night shift. I have nightmares of those whispers calling my name, of the hands on the crib, of the faceless figure just standing there, watching. And sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I think I hear the echo of the voice again. Kelly, Kelly. I will never work a night shift again. But I can't stop hearing it, and I can't stop thinking about the people who didn't make it out. The hospital swallows the night, and whatever lives there waits. It doesn't care if you see it or not. It just waits. Story the end. It was the winter of 2018 when I took a job working overnight at a gas station off Interstate 40 in western Tennessee. The pay wasn't great, but I needed something steady while I figured my life out after a messy breakup. The place was small, just 4 pumps, a mini-mart, and a single restroom around back that constantly smelled like bleach and mildew. Most nights were dead quiet, just a few truckers stopping for coffee or cigarettes before heading back on the road. The manager, a guy named Rick, told me during training that things got weird around 3 a.m. You'll hear the building creak, maybe smell diesel even when no one's around. Don't freak out, he said, laughing. Old pipes, old wiring, that's all. At first, I believed him. My first couple of weeks went by fine. The biggest issue was boredom. I'd spend the hours between midnight and 5 stocking shelves, mopping floors, or zoning out to the soft hum of the coolers. Occasionally, a raccoon would knock over a trash can outside and scare the hell out of me, but otherwise it was peaceful. Then, one night in early February, something changed. It was around 2:45 a.m., and I was counting the cash drawer when I heard the front door bell chime. I looked up. No one was there. The glass door swung slowly shut like it had been opened and released. Cold air brushed my face. I stepped around the counter. Hello? Silence. The pumps were empty, no cars. I glanced at the security monitor above the register, which cycled through the parking lot and aisles. For a brief second, I saw movement in aisle 4 near the coolers, something tall and human-shaped. I turned my head toward the aisle, but it was empty. When I looked back at the monitor, the shape was gone. That was the first time I felt it, the sense that someone else was there with me. Not just a customer, but something watching. The next few nights, little things kept happening. The door would chime randomly. The coffee machine would start brewing by itself. I'd restock the snack aisle only to find the bags turned upside down an hour later. I told myself I was just tired, maybe jumpy from the long hours. But then came the knocking. It was always the same, 3 soft knocks coming from the storage room behind the counter. The first time I heard it, I thought it was Rick, maybe checking inventory early. But when I opened the door, the room was dark and empty. The smell hit me immediately. A sour, metallic odor like rusted blood and wet rags. I turned the light on and saw nothing unusual. Boxes stacked neatly, mop bucket in the corner. But as I stepped inside, I noticed the concrete floor had a small, dark stain in the center about the size of a handprint. It looked fresh. I scrubbed it clean that night. The next night, it was back. When I told Rick about it, he brushed it off. Condensation, he said. The floor sweats when it gets cold. Don't let this place get to you. That was easy for him to say. He wasn't there alone at 3 a.m. A week later, things escalated. It was a Friday night, dead quiet. I was in the back mopping when I heard the doorbell chime again. I walked out, expecting a customer, but the store was empty. The security camera screen flickered once, then showed static. Then, faintly, from the far end of the store, came the sound of someone breathing. I froze, listening. It was rhythmic, heavy, almost like someone standing just out of sight behind the end cap shelves. Hello? I called out, forcing my voice steady. We're closed for cleaning. No answer. The breathing stopped. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight between the aisles, and that's when I saw her. A woman, standing in the refrigerated section. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like an old hospital gown soaked through with something dark. Her hair clung to her face, dripping. She stared at me through the glass of the cooler door, her head tilted slightly, eyes empty and wide. I stumbled backward, the mop clattering to the floor. When I looked back, she was gone. The cooler door swung open, creaking softly. Inside, the milk jugs had toppled over, leaking across the shelf. My heart hammered as I called Rick. It rang twice before he answered, groggy and annoyed. What is it? There's someone in the store, I said. A woman. She was just here. He sighed. Check the doors. Lock them if you have to. Probably some junkie wandered off the highway. I'll call the sheriff. But the sheriff never came. And after I hung up, I realized something that made my skin crawl. There were no wet footprints leading away from the cooler. Over the next few nights, I barely slept. Every shift felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, casting long shadows across the aisles. I started leaving the radio on just to drown out the quiet. But sometimes, between songs, I could swear I heard faint whispers coming through the static. The worst night came near the end of February. It was about 3:10 a.m. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I was sweeping near the front when the power suddenly cut out. Total darkness. The humming of the refrigerators died, leaving a silence so deep I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then the emergency lights flickered on, dim, red-tinted bulbs that cast everything in a hellish glow. The aisles stretched out like tunnels, and then I heard it again. The breathing. This time it was closer. I turned toward the sound, holding the broom like a weapon. Who's there? Nothing. Just that slow, dragging exhale coming from the hallway to the restroom. I took a step forward. The light above the hallway flickered violently. The door to the restroom creaked open. I shined my phone flashlight toward it, the beam trembling in my hand. Inside, the mirror above the sink was fogged over, though the air was ice cold. And on the mirror, written in streaks of something brown and sticky, were the words, "Stay with me." The smell of blood hit me so hard I gagged. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun around, fumbling with the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The red light above the hallway went out completely. The breathing grew louder, right behind me. Something cold brushed the back of my neck. I kicked the door open with all my strength and bolted back to the front counter. The register display blinked rapidly, showing random numbers, then letters. "Help me, help me, help me," repeating over and over. I ran outside into the freezing wind, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock my car. I didn't go back inside. When the sun came up, Rick called me, pissed that I'd left the place unlocked. I told him what happened. He didn't laugh this time. He just sighed. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. He went on, voice low. "That store used to be part of an old rest stop before they converted it. There was a woman hit by a semi back in '92. The driver said she came out of nowhere. They found her body near the pumps. Sometimes truckers still say they see her walking the lot around 3. I quit that day. Rick called a few times after, asking if I'd reconsider, but I never answered. A month later, the station closed down. Too many power issues, he said. Too many complaints about disturbances. Sometimes I still drive that stretch of I-40 late at night. The building's dark now, boarded up, the pumps removed. But every time I pass, I get the same feeling I did that night, that someone's standing just inside, watching. Once, I swear I saw movement behind the glass door, a pale face, hair hanging wet and limp, eyes black as oil. I don't stop anymore. I just keep driving. Story the end. It was the middle of January when I took the night shift security job at a rural grocery distribution center just outside Kansas City. The place sat about a mile off the main road, surrounded by open fields and patches of dark forest. The pay was decent, and the idea of a quiet night job where I just had to watch cameras and make rounds sounded perfect. I was 28, broke, and desperate to keep my car from getting repossessed. My first night went by fine. The warehouse was massive, easily the size of 4 football fields, filled with endless rows of metal shelves stacked with food products. The air smelled faintly of cardboard, oil, and cleaning solution. My only company was a single forklift driver who worked late shipments and the hum of refrigeration units coming from the far end of the building. The building itself had been around since the 1970s. The night supervisor, a quiet older man named Rick, told me they'd added new sections over the years, but the original structure was still intact. He warned me that some of the cameras in the East Wing were unreliable and that the lights there sometimes flickered because of old wiring. "Don't worry if things go dark for a few minutes," he said with a chuckle. "It happens all the time." At first, I didn't think much of it, but by my second week, I started realizing why this place had such high turnover for night guards. It was around 2 a.m. on a Wednesday when I noticed movement on one of the monitors. It was subtle, just a flicker in the corner of camera 9, which overlooked the East Wing. I leaned closer. There was someone standing at the far end of the aisle. A man, maybe, wearing what looked like a reflective vest. He wasn't moving, just standing there, head slightly tilted. I picked up the radio. "Rick, you got anyone working in the East Wing tonight?" "No one should be in there." His voice crackled back. "We closed that section off last month." "Why?" I blinked and looked again. The figure was gone. "Never mind," I said. "Must have been a glitch." Rick didn't respond for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Don't go down there alone." That sent a chill through me. I wanted to laugh it off, but something about his tone made my stomach twist. Later that night I did my routine round. The East Wing lights were out, like always. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but it felt like the beam was swallowed by the shadows. The shelves stretched endlessly in both directions, making it hard to tell where I was. The cold air was thicker there, almost humid. Halfway through the aisle, I heard it, footsteps. Slow, steady, about 20 feet behind me. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I turned slowly. Nothing. The sound stopped, but the air felt alive, humming faintly with static. I started walking faster. Then I heard breathing. Deep, ragged, human. It was so close it could have been over my shoulder. I spun around, shining the light wildly through the aisles. The beam caught on something, a reflective vest hanging in midair. No, not hanging. Being worn. A man stood there, tall, head tilted like before. I couldn't make out his face, just the faint glint of light off what looked like goggles. My throat tightened. "Hey!" I shouted, forcing my voice to stay even. "You're not supposed to be here." No response. I took one step forward. The figure twitched, like a puppet yanked by invisible strings, then vanished. I ran. I didn't even look back. I made it to the control room, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands shook as I scanned the monitors again. Every feed was normal, except camera 9. In the grainy footage, I saw myself running down the aisle, but behind me, the figure followed, its head jerking unnaturally side to side. The next morning, Rick came in early. I told him what I'd seen, but he didn't look surprised. He sighed and rubbed his face. "You're not the first," he said. He told me that about 15 years earlier, a worker named Cal had died in that very section. His forklift had malfunctioned, pinning him against a support beam. They found him hours later, his chest crushed. After that, people started quitting, saying they heard him walking the aisles or saw his reflection in the freezer doors. I didn't believe in ghosts. But after that night, I stopped using that hallway. Still, it didn't stop. A week later, I was in the office reviewing shipment logs when the motion sensors went off. Zone 4, East Wing. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the camera feed. There it was again. That figure, standing between the shelves, head still tilted, the reflective vest glowing faintly. I called out on the radio, "Rick, I've got movement in the East Wing again." Static. Then his voice. Soft, distant. "Don't talk to him." "Rick, what the hell does that mean?" No reply. I stared at the monitor. The figure turned slowly to face the camera. I could make out his hands now, blackened like they'd been burned. His head cocked to one side, and for a second, the lights in the warehouse flickered. When they came back on, the figure was inches from the lens, face blurred, mouth wide open. The screen went black. I jumped to my feet, heart pounding. I ran into the hallway, yelling for Rick. But the building was dead silent. No humming machines, no forklifts, no refrigeration. Just silence. As I walked past the break room, I noticed the vending machine's glass was fogged from the inside. I wiped at it with my sleeve. For a second, I saw a handprint. Black, greasy, like someone had pressed their palm against the inside. I stumbled back. The lights above me flickered again, then went out completely. I could hear it then, the sound of metal scraping against concrete like something being dragged. Closer and closer. My flashlight flickered on, revealing a trail of dark marks across the floor, leading toward the storage corridor. The scraping stopped. Then a whisper. My name. It wasn't from the radio. It was right beside me. I turned the flashlight, and for half a second I saw his face. The man from the footage. Skin melted and blackened, mouth half open as if frozen mid-scream, his white, dead eyes locked on mine. The light went out. I must have run. I don't remember. The next thing I knew, I was outside, gasping in the freezing air, my flashlight still clutched in my hand. When the day shift arrived, Rick was gone. They said he'd quit without notice. His locker was empty, except for his uniform, and a single pair of burned gloves sitting neatly on top of his boots. I quit the same day. I told the HR rep that I couldn't handle night shifts, that it was too quiet. She just nodded and said, "Most people don't last long here. You're not the first." That was nearly 6 years ago, but sometimes when I drive down that highway late at night, I can see the warehouse in the distance, lights still flickering in the east wing, and if I stop the car and listen close enough, I swear I can hear the faint echo of metal scraping concrete and the slow, steady drag of burned boots walking the aisles. Story the end.